Someone calls out to another person. The man stands, towering over the guy. A man with a gloomy look asks if the guy is another alien from another world. The guy's eyes widen in surprise. The guy sits on his knees in the city square, perplexed. Medieval town with a chapel. The man scratches his head and wonders where to start. The guy looks at his hands in confusion. The man says he understands the guy's confusion and invites him to calm down and listen. The guy, looking stunned, lifts his t-shirt and feels his stomach. The man repeats for the guy to calm down, not understanding why the guy is taking off his shirt. This world is called Iria. Swords. The girl with red hair swings with a sword in her hand. Magic. A woman with glasses casts a purple magic seal. A muscular man with a cigar in his teeth swings his fist menacingly. And hordes of demons and monsters. A crowd of different monsters, including a cyclops, an ogre, a goblin, and others. Because of them, there is an ongoing struggle for survival in this world. Opposite the blue portal stands a wizard with a staff and a tense swordsman. They are shrouded in blue sparks. This world tends to draw aliens from other dimensions into its battle. And first they end up in this city, Frontier City, Xenowis. The man asks if the guy studied magic and martial arts. The guy shakes his head, looking confused. He replies that no, and asks if this is really what they teach. The man turns around. He says the guy seems to be classless too. The guy asks again. The man says that's what they call someone like a guy, and adds that he'll explain along the way. He asks what the guy's name is. The guy replies that his name is Lee Sun-min. The man replies that since he met Song-min, he cannot leave him to his fate. He waves his hand. He adds that Song-min is probably hungry. He offers to go eat, and at the same time he will explain everything about the world of Iria. Song-min happily thanks. They are walking down the alley. The man asks if Song-min is thirsty. Song-min says yes. The man hands him a flask of water. Song-min takes the flask and thanks him. The man replies that these are trifles. Song-min drinks. He takes water into his mouth. He suddenly spits water directly into the stunned man's face. The man bends over and clutches his face, screaming. His eyes begin to hurt. Song-min pours water from his flask. He says it's not easy to pose as a newly hatched rookie. He asks if the man really wanted to give him goblin paralysis poison. Song-min sticks out his tongue with a gloomy look. He adds that goblin paralysis poison dissolved in water has no taste or color, but has an almost imperceptible, unpleasant odor. He says the venom will also tingle slightly on the tongue, but the eyes will tingle much more intensely. He asks if the man was really thinking of fooling the stupid newcomer and selling him into slavery. With his face contorted in pain and his eyes red, the man asks how Song-min knows this. Song-min throws away the flask. The man shouts that Song-min is not just a rookie who has just been summoned to the world of Iria. Song-min replies that no, because he is a newly summoned out of class. The man attacks Song-min in rage. Song-min knees the man hard in the groin. The man screams in pain. Song-min notices the man has a dagger attached to the inside of his vest. Song-min says he has 13 experience. He pulls out a dagger. With a gloomy look, he asks if the man really doesn't remember the rules of the world of Iria. He adds that this rule says not to trust anyone. He raises his fist. Blood splashes. Song-min says that this is the worst world in the universe. After robbing the dead man, Song-min finds only 100,000 and only one dagger. He attaches the dagger to his belt. He thinks it's better than nothing. He notices that his body has changed. He immediately grabbed it, then began to check his stomach, but did not find a single scar or muscle. He remembers his past muscular body with scars and compares it with his present one. He actually went back 13 years ago, to the moment when he first appeared in the world of Iria. He thinks gloomily that it looks like the artifact actually worked. He says his name is Lee Sun-min. He is 27 years old. Before going back in time, he was a C-rank mercenary. He remembers himself in the past. He had a standard poor life. He earned just enough to last until the next day. Without natural talents and noble birth, he could not occupy a higher berth. He was constantly looking for a solution to this problem. Song-min remembers how angry he was. He grabbed the slightest chance. He was lucky because he found an unexplored dungeon. He remembers how, in armor and with a sword in his hands, he walked towards the red crystal. After a grueling battle, he found a small chest. There was something glowing in the chest. He opened it with great hope. Inside, he found only a stone with a golden design on it. Since then he carried the stone with him. Song-min could not find out what to do with the stone and why it was needed. A system notification has appeared. The homecoming stone is activated. You will be transported to the point of departure 13 years earlier. Song-min looks down thoughtfully. He saw this notice right before his death. Apparently, this stone is needed to return its owner to the past. Xingming opens the stats panel with hope. She reveals that Lee Sun-min is classless. He has no abilities or skills. He thinks indignantly that everything is happening again. He had a glimmer of hope, but now he realized that he found himself in the world of Iria with exactly the same characteristics as last time. He thinks that in this case this is a meaningless return. He looks at the stats panel. He has 13 years of combat experience in the world of Iria. His memories are not as detailed, but he remembers some particularly vivid events. He goes forward. He decides he can take advantage of some out-of-class privileges. He approaches a wooden gate, above which there is a chiropractor's inscription. Various people from other worlds arrive in the world of Iria. A girl with pink hair holds a staff while standing among the fire. Among the people from other worlds there are magicians and martial artists. A girl with white hair raises her fist. But most often those outside the class end up in the world of Iria. Out of class can become whatever they want, and there is even an opportunity for them to receive a special growth bonus. And although this sounds good, in practice, the non-class ones are always the very bottom of the food chain of the world of Iria. Non-class ones initially do not have abilities, and therefore most of them simply die before they have time to develop. Song-min remembers himself with a gloomy look. He says that he was the same, a C-rank mercenary. His life for 13 years was full of humiliation, poverty, and a constant struggle for survival. All that awaited him was an inglorious death. An image of a curled-up insect appears, illustrating Song-min. He has achieved nothing and does not remember a drop of joy. Now, a bespectacled, bearded chiropractor asks Song-min if Song-min really wants skeletal enhancement surgery. Song-min agrees. This time, Song-min will do anything to make his life better. Change of frame. System notifications appear. The first notice reveals that Song-min's skeleton has been upgraded to that of a low-level martial artist. The second notice reveals that Song-min has learned a technique called Heavenly Concentration. Song-min thinks with a grin that this is not bad. He is looking at his right hand, and in his left hand he is holding a yellow book. Now he has 2 directions for growth. 3 circles appear, 2 of which are yellow. A skull and a book are depicted in yellow circles. The third gray circle shows a building similar to the Colosseum. This is what he did not receive in Xenovis last time out of ignorance, thereby cutting off his path to rise in society. Skeletal enhancement surgery gives Song-min her first direction. Now he has a special skeletal structure that allows him to easily master martial arts. The frame depicts a purple skeleton. Song-min decided that he needed to take advantage of the moment to receive such a service from the master, so this is the first thing he will do when he gets to Xenovis. He recalls being given painful acupuncture by a bespectacled, bearded chiropractor. A prerequisite for free skeleton upgrade is to be non-class without skills. In the past, Song-min didn't know about this, so he couldn't improve the skeleton. In this life he decides to do everything right. A system notification appears. Skeleton of a low-level martial artist. Ideal for mastering martial arts, it gives a slight advantage in speed of mastery over a regular skeleton. Since the bearded chiropractor with glasses will soon die, there will be no out-of-class people receiving such an improvement in the future. Song-min clenches his fist with a satisfied expression. He now has an improved skeleton and a special growth booster for non-classes. He believes this is the path to quick success. And the second opportunity for growth, which can only be obtained in Xenovisa, is the technique of celestial concentration. The frame shows the same yellow book. This is a basic technique for accumulating spiritual energy. The shot shows a man engaged in meditation. There are many techniques for working with energy. They differ in the level of control over energy and the speed of its concentration. In his previous life, Song-min had learned the ordinary level 2 concentration technique. It was only later that he learned that an old, inconspicuous bookstore in Xenovis had a book on level 1 concentration techniques. He remembers a book standing on the shelf. The second-hand bookseller did not know about its true value, and Song-min purchased the book very cheaply. He remembers a second-hand bookseller who, with a bored face, said that he would sell a book of the celestial concentration technique for 40,000 eras. Song-min corrected the mistakes that in the past deprived him of a chance for a better life. 2 out of 3 chances are no longer missed, and all this on the very first day of returning to the world of Iria. He walks forward with a contented look, feeling the changes in his skeleton and also thanks to the book. The third chance is to win a prize in a tournament in the Colosseum. This tournament will take place exactly in a year. The requirements for participants are low because this tournament is only for non-class participants. Song-min walks down the street past local residents. He is more than confident in his chances of winning, provided that he stays in Xenovis this year and devotes time to training. He thoughtfully argues that now he should quickly find income in order to live somewhere. To do this you need to earn at least 30,000 per day. He needs a job where he can hone his skills at the same time. Songming approaches a merchant sitting on the street. Songming decides that he will become a monster hunter. The merchant raises an eyebrow and asks if Songmin wants to buy something. Songming looks at the leather breastplate. He says that this armor will surely suit him. The merchant replies that this is possible because the owner of the armor before meeting death was the same size as Songming. He invites Songmin to take a closer look at the goods. Songmin, looking like an innocent fool, chooses armor, a spear, and 2 daggers. The merchant says he will sell if Songming has the money. Songming replies that he has 60,000 eras. The merchant laughs loudly and says that the armor, spear, and 2 daggers are worth at least 300,000 eras. He tells Songming not to ruin his trade and go away. Songmin asks if he can get things in installments. The merchant shoos him away with an indifferent look. Songming asks how much the merchant is willing to buy his own clothes for. He adds that the clothes are made in a very technologically advanced world, so there will definitely be many takers, and if you find the right merchant, he will give even more than 300,000 eras. The merchant laughs loudly. He asks if Songming was really hoping to get pity. He points his finger at Songmin. The merchant says that Songmin is too naive and asks if Songmin really expected that they would take pity on him and sell his things so cheaply. With a tired grin, Songmin replies that he would be very grateful. The merchant laughs again. He cheerfully agrees to the installment plan and adds that he doesn't need Songmin's clothes. He hands him a leather breastplate. The merchant says with a wide grin that he respects those who do everything to survive. He says he will be glad if the things help Songmin survive. He adds that now they will have to meet often, because Songming has a debt of 240,000 Songmin thanks with an annoyed look. Change of frame. Songming stands in the forest in armor with a spear and 2 daggers. He argues that even light armor greatly increases the likelihood of staying alive. He does not regret that he spent everything he acquired and got into debt. He examines the leather breastplate. He thinks intensely about the fact that in his past life no one did him any favors. He wonders if he has become luckier in this life. He believes that luck is a phenomenon that few people know about in the world of Iria. He takes a step forward. Songming decides to be careful because the merchant might be up to something and decide to profit from him. He is standing in the forest. He looks to the sky. He remembers how he first came to the forest to hunt in his previous life. He only had a club. He was terribly scared. Songming clenches his fist. He laughs when he thinks about how pitiful he was 13 years ago. System notifications appear. The first notification reports that Songming remembered the lightning leap technique. The second notification states that he remembered the steel-breaking skeleton technique. The third notification states that he remembered the rock punch technique. The fourth notice reports that he remembered the spirit-killing spear technique. The shot shows a calm sunset sky. Songming moves through the forest with quick jumps. He sees a goblin. The goblin turns around. Songming quickly latches onto the goblin's head with his spear. The tip of the spear pierces the goblin's head through the jaw. Spear knocking out the spirit technique. First movement. Killer shot. Songming pushes the spear forward with the goblin. The goblin falls, killed. Songming freezes. He winces from the pain in his palm. He scratched and burned his palm with the spear shaft. Kill shot is a technique of shooting a spear using the left hand. At first, this technique leaves burns on the palm. Songmin laughs cheerfully and thinks about how he could use some calluses. He clenches his hand into a fist. He thinks that he doesn't see the point in this return, but now he has a chance. Change of frame. A man with long hair sits on the floor in a dark room, meditating. A red aura thickens around the person. Blue sparks appear out of nowhere. They surround a person who did not expect this. Change of frame. Night. Songming approaches a large building. He goes inside. An innkeeper named Jack Agassi greets Songmin. Jack says hello. Songmin takes out a bag and says that he brought payment for the night. Jack asks what Songmin is paying with. Songmin replies that it is the same as always. He takes a spear from a bottomless bag. Jack asks Songmin where he got such a bag, because it costs about 1.5 million. Songming replies that he received a discount from the merchant. Jack says that Songmin is a businessman. He evaluates the blood serum and goblin teeth that Songming brought. Jack says this will last for a couple of days. He adds that no one in the Magician's Guild would buy this, because magicians are greedy. He says Songmin has talent. Songmin asks what's so talented about that. Jack replies that when an out-of-class boy approached him and offered to pay his rent with the fruits of hunting monsters, he agreed, but did not expect Songming to last long. Jack says that Songmin has been regularly bringing him payment for 2 weeks after a successful hunt. Jack repeats that Songmin is talented. Songming frowns in irritation. Jack continues talking, noting that usually out-of-class people barely make ends meet, and Song Min with his talent could very well become like Xion. Jack laughs. Song Min goes to the stairs. Jack calls out to him. Song Min replies that he is tired. He walks up the stairs, clenching his fist. He thinks gloomily about the word talented. He enters the room. He believes that the word talented does not suit him at all. Over his entire past life, he has only grown to a mercenary of rank C. A system plate with characteristics appears. Lee Sun Min, classless. He is a low-level martial arts practitioner. He has skills. Heartbreaking spear technique, 4 stars. Lightning leap, 2 stars. Exoskeleton called metal blood, 2 stars. Stonebreaker technique, 2 stars. These are all techniques that Song Ming learned in his previous life. These are the mechanics of the world of Iria. If he remembers a technique, he can practice it. He believes that this is at least something to start with, but these are just second-level martial techniques. You won't achieve significant results with these techniques. Song Ming imagines how futile it would be to try to use these techniques on a stronger opponent. He looks at the Celestial Concentration technique, 2 stars. He thinks that he really hopes for it, because this is the only first-level technique. He irritably sits down in a meditation pose. He thinks that this technique also has its limits, because it does not provide endless energy. He begins to meditate. A white aura appears around him. He thinks that he needs more complex martial arts techniques. The next day, Jack's daughter Lula calls out to Song Min. She asks if he is going hunting again. She asks why he needs this, because he is only risking his life in vain. He replies that this is the only way for him to earn money as a newcomer to this world. She points her finger at him and calls him a fool. She adds that he could look for a regular job even as a newcomer. She sighs and says that Song Min could work at their inn because Jack speaks well of him. Song Min shakes his head. He refuses because he doesn't know how to cook or clean. Lula replies that learning to be a tavern worker is not as risky as hunting every day. Song Min smiles slightly. He turns to leave and promises to be back by lunch. Lula calls out to him worriedly. Song Min remembers that this has already happened. He remembers how he washed the floors while the commander screamed. He lived the life of an opportunist, unable to refuse anyone. He remembers laughing awkwardly. You can live like this. However, he decides not to waste his life on this. He moves forward confidently. This time he will do everything to take possession of what has always made him envious. It represents a white spark and an insect nearby. He is confident that he will do everything for this and will definitely achieve success in this life. Change of frame. The bell is ringing. Song Ming looks up. Midday chime. He thinks that new aliens will appear in the square. A blue portal appears near the fountain in the square. The guy with long hair comes out of the portal. Song Ming thinks that this is a boy of the same age who is studying martial arts. The boy looks confused. Song Min thinks that this is not surprising. Some local bandits will immediately notice him by his behavior. The bandits approach the boy with smiles, talk to him about something and give him a flask. Song Ming tenses up. He turns away, deciding that it doesn't concern him. He crashes into someone. He looks up at the man he crashed into. He is a huge, muscular man with a scar and tattoos on his face. The wild-eyed man says that Song Ming broke his collarbone. He punches the stunned Song Ming's face. Song Ming falls to the ground from the impact. The crowd looks on in fear. The man tells people not to worry because Song Min broke his collarbone and now he gets what he deserves. He adds that he will teach Song Min a lesson and he will pay compensation, so there is nothing to see here. The crowd disperses. One of the bandits calls out to the man as his friend. He replies that Song Min broke his collarbone and will now pay for it. A boy with long hair holds a flask in his hands. The second bandit encourages the boy to drink from the flask. Song Min grits his teeth when he realizes that it's a gang. He notes that the man's blow is so-so, but skillful. Song Ming looks at the huge, intimidating man in front of him. He understands that this man is a third-class hand-to-hand combat practitioner. Hand-to-hand combat skills are divided into several classes. Third-class martial artists are the lowest and are achieved in the shortest possible time even with little martial arts proficiency. Song Ming thinks hard about the fact that he himself has not even reached 3rd grade yet. He understands that he cannot win alone, and the locals are indifferent to newcomers. He looks back at the boy with long hair. Song Ming shouts to him that there is paralysis poison in the water. The boy freezes. Song Min thinks that the boy is his age, so it is unclear whether he will be of any use. But he notes that the boy looks like someone from Miram, so he must be able to do something. The boy pours water on the ground. The man grins. He says that Song Min is a decent-looking guy, but he acts ugly. He adds that there will be buyers among the perverted nobility for someone like Song Ming. Song Min stands up. The man swings his knee. Song Ming grits his teeth. He decides that he cannot leave it like that, because the man must get what he deserves. Song-min uses the lightning jump technique. He swings his elbow at the man using an exoskeleton called Metal Blood. He elbows the man in the side. The bandits are dumbfounded. Song-min uses the rock punch technique and hits the man's torso. The man laughs. He asks if Song-min has learned to fight. He adds that this will not stop him. Song-min clenches his teeth and fists. He understands that the man is created as if from stone, which means he knows some protective techniques. Song-min understands that with his childish weight and strength he cannot defeat the man. One of the bandits shouts that the guards may be idiots, but they can come in response to the noise. The second bandit agrees that they need to leave. The boy looks at the tense Song-min with curiosity. The man raises his fist. Song-min understands that he should try using the spear. He takes out a spear from a bottomless bag. Suddenly, a boy with long hair calls out to Song-min and is very close. He smiles and asks Song-min to repeat what he just said. Song-min freezes and looks at the boy in surprise. He screams in fear that this is not the place. The boy, with a slight wave of his hand, uses spiritual energy to throw the man into the air. He adds that this man does not know his place and dares to interrupt him. Song-min is shocked. A man falls unconscious into a crowd of bandits. Song-min frantically tries to figure out who this boy is. A palm strike with a charge of spiritual energy is not the second or even the first class of hand-to-hand combat. This boy is a master. Song-min realizes that this is a martial artist, his peer, summoned just a couple of weeks after himself. The boy asks what this place is and asks to tell him. Song-min realizes that this boy is the lesser heavenly demon, Hwichi Ho-young. Change of frame. Black silhouette against a background of bright flames. The cult of the heavenly demon is representatives of an orthodox sect that reveres power and strength. The strongest among them always becomes the leader, the heavenly demon. Two black silhouettes stand side by side in black and red clothes. The offspring of the heavenly demon are called young leaders. Ho-young has master-level techniques. When Ho-young came to the world of Aria, he soon became famous. Song-min's peer reached heights, barely crossing the threshold, when Song-min himself never even dreamed of such a thing. Change of frame. They came to Song-min's house. Ho-young says his name and says he is 13 years old. He is sitting on the bed. Song-min is surprised to note that Ho-young is a year younger than him. He introduces himself in response and says that he is 14 years old. Ho-young chuckles and says he's intrigued by Aria's world, which is different from his world. He asks if there is a celestial demon cult here. Song-min says no. Ho-young laughs, bowing his head. He then remembers Song-min shouting about there being poison in the water. Song-min repeats his words. Ho-young laughs and asks how Song-min dares to call him you. Song-min immediately comes to his senses and bows his head, apologizing. He can't believe he has to bow down to a 13-year-old. Ho-young points his finger at Song-min and says he saw him fight. He adds that he hasn't seen anything like this for a long time. Song-min purses his lips. Ho-young says that Song-min is incompetent, and his techniques and their execution are no good. The footage shows all of Song-min's blows on the man. He asks who taught Song-min such clumsy moves. Song-min clenches his teeth, suppressing his irritation, and asks what Ho-young is getting at. Ho-young stands up and says with a serious face that he will teach Song-min martial arts. Song-min is silent for a long time, amazed. Ho-young happily adds that if Song-min learns from him, he will stop being so clumsy. Song-min asks if Ho-young will really teach him martial arts. Ho-young confirms this. He points his finger at Song-min, adding that he will do it on just one condition. Song-min is perplexed. Ho-young says that Song-min will have to become his friend. Song-min is shocked. Cut to frame and flashback. Little Ho-young calls his father and tells him that he wants to make a friend. The father asks again and clarifies who told Ho-young about this. Ho-young takes out the book and exclaims that he read about it in it. He adds with enthusiasm that the book says that with a friend no trouble is scary. The father agrees with this, but adds that this is only for mortals. He angrily says that Ho-young is the heir to the throne and will someday be the warlord of countless hordes of demons. Ho-young's father is the leader of a celestial demon cult named Hwichi. He adds that a ruler does not need friends. He yells at Ho-young to go practice martial arts instead of reading nonsense. A frightened Ho-young agrees and runs away. Hwichi looks after Ho-young gloomily. He thinks about how he had to say this. He's worried. He remembers seeing Ho-young standing among the people killed in battle. Hwichi called the fighters for training, and although they were all amateurs, there were 50 of them. But his 10-year-old son dealt with them with ease. He remembers how Ho-young dealt with the fighters in the fight. He thinks that Ho-young is his son, but he is so strong that it even frightens him. He grimly hopes that the lot will not fall on Ho-young. Change of frame. Ho-young points to Song-min and asks to be his friend. As the heir to the heavenly demon cult, Ho Young grew up under relentless scrutiny and had great expectations placed on him. The still shows a flashback where H-Witch-Eye Hack tried to force Ho Young to sit in the lotus position. Ho Young's training began almost from the cradle, and he had no time to make friends. Sun Min points at himself in confusion and asks why he has to be Ho Young's friend. Ho Young asks if Sun Min isn't friends with all his peers. It was completely unexpected. Sun Min and Ho Young shake hands. Ho Young smiles and calls the tense Sun Min his friend. Song Min is dismayed to think that he is actually 17 years old, and he became friends with a 13-year-old boy. Change of frame. Ho Young kept his promise and began teaching Sun Min martial arts. They are standing in Song Min's room. Ho Young says he will teach Sun Min the purple path. The Way of Violet Dawn is an art created by an unorthodox sect of demons. The energy when performing it is purple in color. The shot shows a man with a sword engulfed in purple energy. Song Min asks again. He says that he thought Ho Young would teach him heavenly demon martial arts, calling Ho Young out on you. Ho Young leans ominously towards Sun Min. He says that they are friends, and friends address each other on a first-name basis. Song Ming agrees tensely. Ho Young smiles innocently. He explains that he cannot teach Song Ming the way of the heavenly demon, since this art school is only for the heavenly demon and his heirs. He adds that Song Ming will like the Way of the Violet Dawn because it is a very good fighting art. The frame shows the silhouettes of two people, one of whom is engulfed in red energy and the other in purple. Ho Young stands between them. Ho Young smiles eagerly at Sun Min and asks if he's ready to start. Change of frame. Song Ming stands in the forest with a spear in his hands, wiping dirt off his cheek. He thinks about how a month has passed since then. He keeps his foot on the fallen goblin. An incredible coincidence brought Sun Min together with Ho Young, who taught him the path of the Violet Dawn. Song Ming stands among the bodies of defeated goblins in the forest. He believes that he is gradually becoming stronger. He wipes dirt from his cheek. He thinks about how he is currently somewhere between second and first-class martial arts proficiency. Song Min notes that when compared to his previous life, this is a huge achievement. A mental image of Ho Young pops into his head. He says in disappointment that Sun Min's teacher is the great Ho Young, and Sun Min couldn't achieve more in a month. He adds that Song Min is truly untalented. Sun Min tells Ho Young's mental image to shut up. Song Ming turns around, deciding that he needs to collect the most valuable things from the goblins. At this moment, a huge orc appears from behind the bushes and swings a bat. Sun Min manages to react and jumps back. The bat lands wide. Song Ming thrusts his spear forward. He doesn't understand where the orc came from here. If he had not reacted in time, he would have been dead already. The orc glares at Song Ming. Song Ming quickly looks around. He notices that the orc is alone, but is not sure about it. He attacks the orc with a spear in the chest, piercing him right through. The orc falls to his knees, bleeding. Song Ming jumps to the side. He is glad that killing an orc is not difficult for him. Ho Young's mental image chuckles at Sun Min's pride in killing one orc. Song Ming squats down and looks at the orc. He notes that this area is unusual for orcs. He wonders how the orc ended up here. A voice comes from the side saying that Song Min fights well for his age. Song Ming turns around and sees a man coming out of the forest. He asks the man who he is. The man greets and says his name. He is He Ryung, known as the Orchid Sword in the capital. Sung Min straightens up and asks what He Ryung wants. He Ryung points to the orc and says that there is some problem with him. Change of frame. City. Du Sang Ryong, nicknamed Monkey, asks why they need Sung Min. He Ryung says to ignore the fact that Sung Min is small because he has skill. He points his hand at Song Min. He adds that Song Min will be very useful to them. Black Rain Dagger Wang Pei says that if He Ryung thinks so, then he believes him. He says his name. The witch from Wella's school named Rainier smiles and introduces herself as well. She excitedly asks if Song Min knows what kind of job he will be given. He replies that he can roughly imagine. He Ryung reveals that a tribe of orcs recently set up camp near the city. The shot shows a crowd of armed and angry orcs. He Ryung adds that orcs are attacking villages and travelers. He says that the mercenary guild has offered a reward of 20 million eras to anyone who kills a gang of orcs. He says that, including spoils, it will be approximately 35 million eras. Song Min asks how they will split the money. He Ryung replies that for 5. The shot shows Sung Min, He Ryung, Rainier, Wang Pei and Sang Ryan. Song Ming estimates that he would have received about 7 million eras. He thinks that such a quest doesn't come up often. He notes that the only problem is whether he can trust these people. The shot shows the silhouettes of He Ryung, Rainier, Wang Pei and Sang Ryan with ominous faces. Sung Min remembers something about He Ryung looking at him with a smile. Song Ming grimly agrees. Hee Ryung rejoices and grabs Sun Min by the shoulders. He says Song Ming made the right choice. He adds that this matter will be much easier with Song Ming together. Sung Min thanks for the praise and removes Hee Ryung's hands from her shoulders. He asks what kind of men are sitting on the side with huge backpacks. Hee Ryung replies that they are ordinary out-of-class people who work as porters. They look haggard and gloomy. Hee Ryung asks if Sun Min is from Murim. Song Min says yes. Rainier heads towards the porters. She gives the porter a coin and asks him to buy apples from the merchant. The porter agrees. Hee Ryung says that these men will carry their equipment and receive a small payment. He adds that the porters are of no interest. The porter slowly leaves to buy apples. Rainier looks after him with a smile. Hee Ryung tells the gloomy Sun Min that the porters will follow him at his first request. He then says it's time to go. Song Ming agrees with a grim expression. Hee Ryung smiles sinisterly as he looks at Sun Min. Rainier eats an apple contentedly. Hee Ryung, Wang Pei, Rainier, Sung Min and Sang Ryan walk through the forest. The porters follow them. Song Ming asks how many orcs will be in the camp. Sang Ryan replies that there will be about 50 orcs. He adds that most likely the fight will only be with 30 of them. He says that orcs are stupid and clumsy creatures that only need to be taken by surprise. Song Min asks how they will proceed. Hee Ryung replies that they will split into 2 groups. He says he will go with Song Min himself. Wang Pei, Sun Ryan and Rainier will go together. Next, they will lure the orcs out of the camp, fight with them and win. Rainier demonstrates wind magic. She says that she will use the magic of the wind to make their scent spread throughout the forest. She adds that the orcs hate nothing more than to have their territory invaded, so they will leave the camp to deal with the threat. San Ryan says that the orcs will go straight into an ambush, and then Rainier will cast spells. Wang Pei stands behind with a gloomy look. Hee Ryung shows a flare. He says that he will light it to lure away the other part of the orcs. Thus, they will divide the orcs into 2 fronts and deal with them. Song Min thinks that the plan is normal, although simple. He thinks that it would be better to prepare traps, but there is no time for that. Hee Ryung says that they are already close to the territory. He looks at a pillar with a skull and red cloth on top. Hee Ryung says they separate at the pillar. He goes with Song Ming and a porter. The porter is out of breath from fatigue. Song Ming notices that they have been walking for half a day, and for a non-class porter it must be hard. He looks at the porter and remembers himself. He turns around and asks the porter's name. The porter is surprised by this, but says that his name is. Song Ming says that he is not sure that he can protect Brass when the fight with the orcs begins. He asks Brass to choose whether to run away or move on with them. He thinks that Hee Ryung is definitely not going to protect the out-of-class and doesn't even pay attention to the fact that Sung Min and Brass are talking. Brass, breathless, replies that he cannot escape. Song Ming understands that the guild will destroy Brass if he tries to escape, because he himself went through this. Song Ming tells Brass to defend herself by any means necessary. Brass agrees. Hee Ryung says they are there. The fence of the orc camp can be seen between the trees. Hee Ryung says that they didn't catch any of the patrols. He takes out a flare to lure the orcs. Song Ming tells him to wait and takes out a tub of water from the bottomless bag. Hee Ryung notes that the bag is dimensionless. He asks where Song Min bought such a bag. He replies that he is lucky. Hee Ryung looks at him intently and frighteningly. Song Min explains that the tub is needed to knead the dirt and, by covering it with it, mask the smell. It pours water onto the ground and creates mud. Hee Ryung notes that it is inventive and Sung Min is smart. He replies that he has a good teacher. He falls out in the mud. Hee Ryung agrees that the teacher is good. Covered in dirt, Sung Min says it's Hee Ryung's turn. Hee Ryung also falls out in the mud. The porter asks if he also needs to roll in the mud. Song Min replies that yes, as soon as he stirs up more dirt. A signal flare is flying. The orcs react to her. Hee Ryung says he has an idea to send Brass forward. Song Min asks again. They are sitting near a signal flare. Hee Ryung explains that while Brass is distracting the orcs, they could attack them from behind. Brass is shocked. Song Ming's face darkens. Brass says the orcs will kill him. Hee Ryung nonchalantly replies that it won't happen. He gloomily adds that he himself will kill Brass if he disobeys the order. Brass shakes in horror. Hee Ryung laughs and says it was just a joke. Song Ming purses his lips. He straightens up. Hee Ryung asks what Sung Min is up to. Sung Min replies that he will go first if Hee Ryung doesn't mind. Brass looks at Song Ming in surprise. Hee Ryung ominously agrees. A group of 13-headed armed orcs moves towards them. Song Ming jumps out of the bushes and cuts off the orc's head with a blow from his spear. There are 12 of them left. He hits another orc with the shaft of his spear, killing him. There are 11 orcs left. Song Min wonders if he can defeat everyone. He looks around the crowd of orcs. He mentally corrects himself, convincing himself that he can handle them. He thinks about why Brass felt sorry, because it is pointless to be merciful. The shot shows Brass watching the fight in surprise. He thinks maybe it was sympathy, but they're not even friends with each other. Songming jumps. He understands that both he and Brass are classless, so that's enough. There is an expression that whoever is stronger is the law. The orcs look at Songmin in fear. He thinks that this is a straightforward and cruel rule. Sunmin remembers training with Ho Young. Ho Young explained it to him many times, but Sunmin still didn't succeed. Ho Young told Sunmin to be grateful for his patience and also to remember every word, movement, and how to hold the spear correctly. Songming remembers that he needs to hit from a distance. He decides that this will make him stronger. Soul-crushing spear, level 3. Songming tells himself to hit from a distance. He quickly kills 3 orcs by piercing their chests with a spear. Lightning-fast splitting strike. The other orcs watch Songming fight. Ryung attacks the orcs from behind, catching them by surprise. The orc swings his bat at Brass, who has fallen to the ground. Brass covers his head with his hands and screams pitifully. Songming uses a spear to kill an orc who was about to kill Brass. All orcs are defeated. Ryung cuts off the orc's ear and throws it into a bag. He says they killed 13 orcs. He adds that they couldn't have done it without Songmin. He collected the ears of orcs to prove how many they had killed. He adds that the other group should have already killed the rest of the orcs. He throws the bag of orc ears into Brass's hands and orders her to carry it. Brass manages to catch the bag and agrees. Ryung and Sunmin are standing in the forest, with the bodies of dead orcs lying around. Ryung says to go find the other half of the group. Songming agrees. As he passes Songming, Brass purses his lips. He mumbles a short thank you and leaves to fetch Ryung. Songmin looks after him in confusion. Change of frame. The second group wonders when Ryung and Sungmin will come. Then Sang-ryong, sitting on a cobblestone, sees Ryung and Sungmin. Ryung asks how it went. Sang-ryan replies that everything was easy. Rainier eats bread. Wang Pei stands at a distance not far from another porter. Sang-ryong asks why Ryung and Sungmin are in the mud and if it was difficult for them. He adds that Ryung and Sungmin don't look good. Ryung, sweating and panting, replies that everything went well and Sungmin helped him. He becomes gloomy and adds that the real battle will begin for them right now. Ryung and Wang Pei look at each other and exchange nods. Songming sees Wang Pei extending his hand. Wang Pei throws a dagger at Ranier's chest. Blood sprays from her mouth and she falls. Sang-ryan turns around in shock. Ryung swings his sword at him. Sungmin deflects Ryung's blow. Ryung tells Sunmin to stay out of the way. Songmin gets angry. He remembers how in a previous life a man urged him and threatened not to pay. Songming was carrying a huge bag on his back. He looked at the cheerful crowd of people. The man asked irritably if Songming had never seen an execution. Songming asked again in fear. The man shrugged. He explained that some particularly dangerous mercenary from Muram was to be executed. The mercenary went on business with his partners and then killed them to take the entire reward. Now the mercenary was caught red-handed and was about to be decapitated. Songming looked at the mercenary's face. Change of frame. Sungmin looks at Ryung's face. Ryung says that he didn't expect Sunmin to have such a quick reaction. He adds that it was as if Songming knew in advance. Sungmin thinks gloomily about what he really knew, having seen Ryung executed in a previous life. Even though 13 years had passed, he remembered that moment well, because it was the first time he saw an execution. Sang-ryan fights with Wang Pei. Ryung says that nothing can be done and he saw Sungmin fighting the orcs. He says that he should give credit where credit is due, because Songmin is a good fighter. He runs to the attack and shouts that he is still stronger. Sungmin reflects that Ryung is a second-class fighter. Songming is only on the way between 3rd and 2nd grade, and this is a very strong difference. But he is not going to despair. He is excellent at reading Ryung's movements. Sungmin realizes that Ryung is clearly preparing for a slash. Songming pushes off the ground. He thrusts the tip of his spear forward, determined to stop Ryung on her way. Ryung grunts as he deflects the blow. Songming chuckles. He notes that his experiences from his past life and Ho Young's lessons help him a lot. Ryung backs off and notes that it wasn't bad. He is about to ask if Songmin can do anything else. At this moment, blood sprays from his mouth. He covers his mouth with his hand in fear and asks what it is. Songming replies that it is poison. He explains that he put a long-lasting poison in the mud that Ryung smeared himself with. The poison is not so deadly since it did not enter the stomach, but Ryung's hands are shaking and he cannot cope even with a weaker opponent. Ryung rages and grips the hilt of his sword with shaking hands. Songming crouches to attack. He asks what Ryung is going to do. Ryung quickly jumps to the side. Songming is stunned. Hee Ryung stands behind Brass, grabs him and presses the sword to his throat. He says that he will kill Brass if Song Ming moves. Hee Ryung thinks that Sung Min is soft-hearted and doesn't care about Brass, which means he won't have a choice. Song Min is perplexed. He takes a step forward. He wonders if Hee Ryung was thinking of saving himself thanks to the hostage. Hee Ryung becomes alert and shouts not to take another step. Song Ming remembers that he was a mercenary for many years, and the only reason to help Brass. He remembers himself, similar to Brass. Song Ming looks gloomy. Hee Ryung smirks. Song Ming tightens his grip on the spear. He understands that now is not the time to reason. After the battle with the orcs, he is exhausted. If not for this circumstance, he would have stabbed Hee Ryung before he even had time to come to his senses. But Song Ming can't. If he tries his best, it may end badly. He cannot count on the poison to last long. If Sang Ryong is defeated, Song Ming will be forced to fight two opponents. Sang Ryan fights Wang Pei. Song Min realizes that he has no choice. Brass smiles sadly. He pushes Hee Ryung with his foot and falls backwards onto him. Song Ming is surprised. Hee Ryung yells at Brass and stabs him in the side with his sword. Hee Ryung grins and says that Brass should have listened to him. Breaststroke falls unconscious. Sung Min stands next to Hee Ryung. Hee Ryung tries to encourage him to stop. Sun Min kills Hee Ryung with a spear. Sang Ryan stands next to the murdered Wang Pei. He is breathing heavily, the dagger sticking out of his shoulder. Breaststroke is dead. Sung Min stands over the bodies of Brass and Hee Ryung. Hee Ryung and Wang Pei are dead. Song Min and Sang Ryan went to the mercenary guild. Having received a reward for the orcs, they divided the proceeds and trophies between them. Change of frame. Ho Young smiles at Sun Min's return. He says Song Ming is late. Song Min replies that he was at work. He falls onto the bed with his arms at his sides. He thinks that if he had more strength, he could save Brass. He thinks gloomily that he did not want to do something in this life for which his conscience would torment him for the rest of his life. Ho Young suddenly states that Sung Min killed a man. Sun Min asks how Ho Young knows this. Ho Young replies that he smells blood. He sits down on the bed. Song Ming reveals that a second-class fighter attacked him, so he had no choice. Ho Young looks at Sun Min and says that he is hiding something else. He asks what Song Min is keeping quiet about. Song Min sits up on the bed. He says that this is a strange question and he has nothing to hide. He asks if Ho Young thinks he couldn't beat a second-tier fighter. Ho Young waves his hand. He replies that he has no doubt about it because Song Min is learning the way of the Violet Dawn. Ho Young says Sung Min is special. He says that he wandered around the city and observed to understand what kind of world it was. He says he noticed a lot. The shot shows Ho Young seeing a homeless man looking for food in a trash can. Ho Young says he quickly learned what life outside of class is all about. The homeless man ate scraps and garbage. Ho Young points out that most classless ones are insignificant. He says that he knows that all people can kill an insect, but not everyone can kill a small animal. To do this, you need to cross a certain line within yourself. The shot shows a man holding a dagger with trembling hands over a harmless little rabbit. Ho Young says that despite this, Sung Min went hunting in the forest on the first day of his enlistment. Song Min tensely asks if this is really that surprising. He adds that he would not have survived otherwise. Ho Young agrees. He asks if Song Min really thinks that other classless people live like this just because they don't understand it. He adds that those outside the class understand everything, but do not dare to end someone's life. He adds that Song Min is also just a teenager, so something doesn't add up here. Sung Min tries to justify himself by saying that he knows how to adapt. Ho Young says with a grin that Sun Min is also good at dodging direct questions. He says that then he will tell his other suspicion. Song Min asks if there are still suspicions. Ho Young stuns Sun Min by saying that Sun Min has no powers. Song Min lay down on the bed and turns to the wall. Ho Young continues that given the fact that Sun Min has no ability, he can't learn more than a third of the material. Ho Young adds that he is intrigued by the fact that it hasn't been more than 3 weeks since Sung Min started hunting with a spear, and his skill is already quite good. Ho Young says that usually a beginner's weak point is a lack of control over internal energy and footwork, but Sun Min does not make these mistakes. Ho Young asks how can a person without abilities become so proficient with a spear in just 3 weeks. Song Min sits up in bed. Ho Young stands opposite and asks who Sung Min is. Song Min gloomily replies that he doesn't understand what he's talking about. Ho Young replies just as gloomily that he doesn't like being lied to. They look at each other in silence. Song Min says everyone has personal information. He asks if prying into someone else's personal life is not evil. He asks if a friend would do this. He waves his hand. Ho Young is unfazed. He says everyone has secrets, and so does he. He offers to tell Song Ming his secret in exchange for Song Ming's own secret. Sun Min replies that he doesn't need Ho Young's secret. Ho Young tries to bargain and offers to tell him another secret of his and teach him an incredibly powerful move in exchange for Sun Min's secret. He offers a choice of the art of wielding a spear and the art of movement during a fight. Song Ming laughs darkly. He says that the irony is that he does not have the ability to fully absorb Ho Young's teachings, nor does he have the internal energy to fully perform the new techniques. Ho Young raises an eyebrow questioningly. He then says that he will share a quarter of his energy with Song Min. Song Ming is stunned. Ho Young replies that he is nosy and Sun Min is his only friend. Ho Young wants to know everything about Sun Min, even the things he keeps secret. Song Ming is surprised. Ho Young says that this is how he sees friendship between people. He asks if this is enough. Song Ming sighs. He asks Ho Young to promise that he won't kill him after revealing the secret. Ho Young asks why he would kill Sun Min if they are friends. Ho Young says he will tell his secret first. He unbraids his hair. Ho Young admits that he is a girl. Song Min is completely shocked. Ho Young replies that this was necessary for the sect, because only a man can become the leader of the heavenly demon sect. She adds that her father told her to live like a boy. Song Min is shocked. Ho Young says that's why she continued to play this role even after she got here. She says it's Song Min's turn to tell the secret. Song Min asks for a minute to collect his thoughts. He mutters that they need to go to different rooms tomorrow. He sighs noisily and holds his breath. Song Ming then admits that he is a returnee. Ho Young is surprised. After a short silence, she asks what this nonsense is. Song Ming is annoyed. Change of frame. Night. Ho Young asks if Sun Min really died and then returned to the past. She says it's incredible, but she believes him. She adds that this explains a lot. She says that if they were not in the Area world, but in another world, she would not believe Song Min's words. She asks why Song Min thought she would want to kill him. Song Min gloomily explains that he was reincarnated in the body of a 14-year-old teenager, but his real age is 27 years old. He asks if she isn't offended that he lied to her about her age while she thought she saw someone of the same age in front of her. Ho Young disagrees. Song Ming is surprised. Ho Young explains that she was the first to approach Sun Min, offering to teach him martial arts and asking him to be friends. She adds that Song Min did not deceive her, but simply agreed. Song Ming is stunned. She adds that this is not a reason to kill him or question their friendship. Ho Young says she spent 3 weeks with him, so she considers him a friend. The shot shows them having lunch together, discussing something. She smiles and says that's all. Song Min wants to say something, but purses his lips. He thanks Ho Young. He bows his head. The shot shows that it is not little Song Min who is thanking him, but an adult. Ho Young adds that he sympathizes with how small the level that Sung Min reached in his past life is. This phrase hurts Song Min's pride. Ho Young says she has more questions for him, but suggests they discuss them later. She gets up. She says that she will now transfer a quarter of her internal energy to him. Song Min looks at her in surprise. Kai energy. The shot shows a man with concentrated energy in the abdominal area. Kai energy is accumulated by martial artists for use in battle. A man destroys the trunk of a large tree with a swing of his fist. Kai energy gives superpowers. Through concentration techniques, martial artists gradually increase their energy potential. A man sits in a meditation pose, and, as a rule, they work on this throughout their lives, achieving incredible potential over the years. This is the basis of a fighter's power. Song Min sits on the bed in a meditation pose without a shirt. Ho Young sits behind him. She puts her hand on his back. Red energy accumulates around her hand. She says that Song Min's blood vessels are very dirty. The transfer of energy potential is a rare phenomenon. Ho Young puts his fingers on a tense Sun Min's throat. She says that at the age of 14 it is too late to start learning martial arts. She says that everything is ready and now she will transfer a quarter of her Kai energy to him. She says with a grin that how much he can keep inside himself depends only on himself. She tells him to use the path of the Violet Dawn. Red energy begins to emanate from Ho Young's hand. She begins to transfer Kai energy. Song Min grits his teeth in pain. Loud sounds are heard. After a while, Song Ming looks at his hand. Violet energy appears around her. Ho Young, breathing heavily, asks what Sun Min thinks about this. She removes her hand and leans over to catch her breath. Song Ming looks at his hand in surprise. Violet energy dances around him. He wonders if it's just a quarter of Ho Young's energy. He feels energy in the abdomen. He realizes that this is much more than everything he was able to accumulate in his past life. Ho Young asks how much he kept. He replies that it seems like half. She tells him not to be upset. She adds that the rest of the energy will dissipate along his meridians. She tells him to apply the path of the Violet Dawn, and then he will take all this energy into the body. She falls on the bed. Song Min shouts her name in concern. He asks what's wrong with her. She replies that she's just a little tired. He looks at her. Sun Min asks why she is doing such a thing for him. She replies that she is doing this because they are friends. She adds that nothing is required of him because she wanted to do it herself. She thinks yes, just for her own sake. Ho Young then raises his index finger in the air. She says that she will now teach Song Min the technique of using a spear as promised. Song Min, stunned, asks if she will give him that too. She begins to explain that the technique of the Spear King, the bearer of the great spear of the wooden sky, will do. She adds that with Song Min's abilities, it will be difficult for him to master it, so she will try to simplify the technique. He interrupts her. Ho Young repeats that he is only doing this for himself. She looks at the ceiling. She adds that she is doing this for her first friend in her life. She says she can't let him die again, this time living only 13 years. Song Ming is about to bow and thank her. Ho Young punches him in the jaw. She says that friends don't bow to each other. Song Ming rubs his jaw. He displeasedly asks why she thinks so and what's wrong with bowing. Ho Young replies that he doesn't like it. She grabs the surprised Song Min by the neck and places him next to her on the bed. She says it would be better if they did something more enjoyable. Song Ming is stunned. He asks what she is talking about. Ho Young turns to face him. She asks him to tell her about his past life. She asks what he knew about her then. He replies that he was struggling to make ends meet, so he only found out about Ho Young through rumors. He adds that Ho Young was said to be unmatched in strength. She is laughing. She says it's not surprising. Sun Min adds that Ho Young left town just a month after she showed up. He says that then nothing was known about her for 3 years. Ho Young replies that she must have been traveling. Song Min asks her again. She replies that what she has always missed most is freedom. Ho Young's silhouette appears against the background of the cult seal. She says that there is no freedom in the cult, so a person is always under supervision and within the framework of established rules. Ho Young says that was the reason why she was called to this world and met Sun Min. He scratches his cheek shyly. Ho Young turns away and says he will leave in a month. She says she will enjoy freedom in a new world. Ho Young says that when Sun Min masters the 9th Heaven Spear technique, she will leave. She asks what Song Min will do. She smiles. She adds that Song Min now has a new life and asks how he would like to live it. Song Min looks at her dumbfounded. He remembers moments from his past life. He thinks about how senselessly he died. He replies that he wants to live better than last time. Ho Young asks if that's all. She leans on her elbow and looks at him. She asks if Song Min has a purpose. He replies that he doesn't know. Ho Young tells him to think about it and therefore tell her. Her eyes light up. She remembers that she wanted to ask Song Min about his past life. She asks him to tell her. Song Min scratches the back of his head shyly. He replies that there is nothing special to tell. Ho Young says she knew it. He calls her a hooligan. Song Min thinks about his past life in Xenowis. He wonders if he ever had one friend. He understands that it is not. He thinks that it's surprising because Sun Min is Ho Young's first friend in his life. They are talking about something with a smile on their face. He understands that she is his very first friend. It was a long night. They talked about everything under the sun. Then a month passed. Change of frame. Blue sky. Ho Young calls Sun Min over. She says that now they will see what Song Min has learned in a month. It's almost time for Ho Young to leave. Song Min stands holding a spear in his hand. After this training, Ho Young will go wandering. Song Min readily says that he will show her all his strength. Ho Young raises an eyebrow. She asks if he really imagined it any other way. She asks if he really thinks that with his abilities he can't fight at his full strength. Blue sky. Sun Min furiously rushes to attack the absolutely calm Ho Young. She says she gives him a 20-move head start. He thinks about how to use them effectively. He remembers Ho Young talking to him. She said that she had come up with a way to simplify the 9th Heaven Spear technique to Song Ming's level. She shook her fist in the air. She said that she called this technique the Song Ming style improved 9th Heaven Spear technique. Song Ming asked, stunned, if she really named it after him. Ho Young happily replied that she adapted the technique for Sun Min so she could add his name. Song Ming thought sadly about not wanting this. He is holding a spear. He thinks about how in this improved 9th Heaven Spear technique, Ho Young combined his technique with some elements of the heartbreaking spear technique. Song Ming wonders if he should use this technique first. He moves his right hand back. Improved 9th Heaven Spear technique, Song Ming style. First movement. He aims his spear. A heartbreaking death blow. Ho Young smiles interestedly. She moves the spear aside with a wave of her hand. She considers this the first movement. Song Ming swings his spear. Ho Young dodges and counts it as a second move. Song Ming grits his teeth in irritation. Improved 9th Heaven Spear technique, Xing Ming style. Second movement. Lightning fast splitting strike. Sung Min throws a few quick punches, which Ho Young parries with his hand. She considers this the third movement. She notices that compared to the beginning of his training, Song Ming is better at the parry block strike movement. Sun Min remembers Ho Young explaining the principle to him. She said that parrying deflects an opponent's attack with an outward movement. She added that a block is the result of a downward rotational movement that blocks an opponent's weapon. She said that then comes the enemy's attack and demonstrated this in practice with his spear. Ho Young said that this is the basics of wielding a spear. He asked displeasedly if he really didn't know about this before. Song Ming replied that he knew, but learned them through trial and error. Sung Min remembers Ho Young's words about him remembering to practice every day until it becomes a habit. Sun Min smiles and thanks Ho Young. He strikes again with his spear. Ho Young counts every blow. When he lands the sixth blow, she asks Song Min what's wrong with his back. She tells him to work his back to increase the power of his punch. Song Min grits his teeth and adjusts his stance. He strikes again. Ho Young says it's better this way. Song Min grits his teeth in displeasure. He wonders if Ho Young really has such a huge advantage. He thinks about how he has already grown to second-class martial arts thanks to the Kai practices Ho Young taught him. He looks at her hand. He notices that Ho Young is parrying all of his attacks with just his right hand. Her level is that of a supreme martial artist. She stands in front of him, red energy surrounding her. She says Song Min looks hesitant. She asks if he has given up already. Song Ming stops to take a breath. He swings his spear again. Ho Young easily parries his attacks. Song Ming angrily tries again and again. She parries his next attack. She waves her hand and says this is his last move. Song Ming's spear is suddenly in front of her face. She is surprised, then grins. It dissolves into the air, turning into red energy. Song Min is shocked. He feels her behind him. She puts her hand to his neck. Ho Young says Sung Min lost. She pats him on the shoulder and tells him he's doing a good job. Song Min annoyedly replies that she parried all the blows with ease and with one hand. Ho Young removes his hand from his shoulder. She says Song Min has a good reaction. She adds that he was born from martial arts, despite his limited Kai energy. She says that he felt her appearance behind him, even if he could not strike. Ho Young says that when you feel something you can't see, that in itself can be called a superpower. She adds that one day he will take this to a level that will give him a significant advantage over the others. Song Ming is silent and breathes heavily. Ho Young says he hopes Sung Min will do it in about 10 years. He asks again. She thoughtfully replies that this training was too easy. Ho Young says she is satisfied with his achievements because Sung Min demonstrated everything she taught him. She adds that the latest move was particularly impressive. Ho Young suggests meeting in 10 years. Song Ming is stunned. Ho Young reminds her that she asked Sun Min what her goal was a month ago. She asks if he has decided anything. Song Min sullenly says no. Ho Young smiles and says that in that case, she will happily be his target. Song Ming's hand is shaking. Ho Young says that a person needs a goal in life. She adds that a person without a goal is like a boat without a helmsman. She tells him to set a goal to defeat her in a fight in 10 years. Song Min interrupts her. He says he can't. Ho Young asks again, confused. Sun Min shouts that even if he makes Ho Young his target, he still won't be able to become like her. He asks her not to talk about the impossible. He remembers how he washed floors in his previous life. He screams that he can't and that it's simply impossible because he's untalented. Sung Min adds that Ho Young was born with talent and that's why she's a genius. He remembers himself from a past life. He adds that Ho Young probably had access to elixirs. He shouts that she doesn't understand what it's like to be a nobody. Song Ming shouts that this is impossible for him because they have been unequal since they arrived in Area World. Ho Young frowns. She says it's disgusting to see him beating himself up. She says that's what turns her off about him. Song Min looks at her angrily. Ho Young says, looking away, that Sun Min is grasping at the failures of his past life that are dragging him down. Song Min grits his teeth angrily and tries to answer her. He shouts that he came here without anything. He looks at his hands. Song Ming shouts that he was summoned to the world of Iria without abilities. He shouts that he took the risk of hunting a boar and then fought with it in the slippery mud, and spent his entire past life in poverty. Ho Young firmly replies that Sung Min has now learned from a mystic martial arts master and has become a second-class fighter in just 3 months. She asks if this isn't a second chance. She adds that Song Min instead listens to his feelings of inferiority that he inherited from his past life. Song Ming becomes furious, gritting his teeth. Ho Young continues by saying that he doesn't even have the desire to look for meaning in life, because he doesn't even dare to try. She asks if he really thinks that if something is beyond his strength, then it's not worth trying. She says he has a new life and a chance. Song Min angrily interrupts her and tells her to shut up. Ho Young worriedly asks if he is angry. Song Min says yes. He grimly clenches his fists and shakes with rage. Song Min mutters that he can't believe he's being lectured by a 13-year-old girl. He angrily says that he can make her his target. He adds that he will practice hard so that in 10 years he can fight her and plunge a spear into her heart. His face is full of rage. Ho Young waves his hand worriedly. She calmly says that there is no need to do this because she will die. She adds that this is not the right thing to do with a friend. Friend? Song Ming freezes. The rage disappears. He agrees. Ho Young says it will be friendly sparring. Song Min looks at her in confusion. He makes an incomprehensible sound and covers his reddened face with his hands. Ho Young says that he can't be understood because he was just angry and now he's embarrassed. Ho Young jumps closer to Sun Min. She removes his hands from his face. She says with a smile that they will meet in 10 years. She smiles cheerfully. She adds that she will look forward to their fight. Song Min jumps aside in fear and blushes. Ho Young teases him with a grin. She asks if he has butterflies in his stomach. Song Min replies that she just moved too close. He adds that she is still a child. Ho Young comes closer. She teases him, saying that he is a 27-year-old man with the face of a teenage boy. Song Ming backs away. He asks her to move back. Song Min looks at her with displeasure. He asks her to move away. Ho Young nuzzles his cheek. She asks if that means he doesn't like her like that. She confidently declares that in 10 years she will grow into a seductive girl and will make him speechless. She adds that then Song Min won't be able to tell that she is a child. A frame with a blue silhouette of an adult girl appears in the background. Lee Sun Min set himself 3 goals. The first goal is to survive. The second goal is to use opportunities missed in a past life. Change of frame. Ho Young holds a stick with a hiking bag. She says they will see each other in 10 years. Song Min smiles after her. He says they will see each other in 10 years. Ho Young tells Sun Min to take care of herself. Song Ming agrees. Ho Young and Sun Min go in different directions. And Sun Min's third target is HWI Ho Young. Song Ming has 3 chances that he should not miss in this life. Surgery to improve the skeleton. The shot shows a blue skeleton in a fighting stance. Heavenly concentration technique. A man sits in a meditation pose. Blue energy accumulates in his abdomen. And lastly, a tournament for extracurriculars. The shot shows a white building that looks like the Colosseum. Various kinds of tournaments are often held in Xenois. Song Ming enters a building that looks like a Colosseum. There is one tournament in which Song Min can participate as a non-class tournament. It's been 10 months since Ho Young left. A muscular, ugly man with his hair in a braid tells the rest of the tournament to take a look as the little guy has come to the tournament too. He adds that he is a 3rd-level fighter and advises Song Min to surrender. During this time, Song Ming grew to the 1st level of martial arts proficiency. Song Ming easily defeats the man. Victory in the out-of-class tournament was given to Song Ming with great ease, because among the out-of-class he had no equal. The prize in the tournament was a sacred elixir of strength, which increases the potential of Kai energy. Song Min receives a box with a pink ball inside. Song Ming took the elixir immediately. The shot shows Song Min sitting in a meditation pose. Violet energy accumulates around him. The sacred elixir of power was a huge help to his energy potential, even though he received the potential from Ho Young. Song Ming decides that he now has everything he wanted from the city of Xenois. There's only one thing left. Change of frame. A city street along which people walk. Song Min addresses Han's Ajashi. Hans rejoices at Song Min's appearance. Hans says he heard about Song Min winning the tournament and congratulates her. Song Min thanks, laughing. Hans asks why Song Min came. Song Min replies that he came to say goodbye. Hans sighs and says he knew it. He laughs cheerfully. He says that the little out-of-class brat has achieved everything that can be achieved in the city of Xenois. He adds that he is happy for Song Min. He pats Song Ming on the shoulder. Song Min thanks. Hans says that the outside world is dangerous, but Song Min can handle it. He adds that the smart always survive longer than others. He hands Song Min an oversized pouch. Song Min catches the gift in surprise. Hans replies that this is not a new bag, but it is larger than the one Song Min bought. Hans grins contentedly. Song Min asks why Hans is giving him a gift. Hans replies that when a gift is given, one must take it. He adds that he still won't be able to sell the oversized bag because the condition is poor. He takes his seat. Hans says this is his parting gift. He adds that if Song Min wants to repay him, then let him come back when he becomes famous and pay 100 times more. Song Min looks at Hans in confusion. Hans grins contentedly. He tells Song Min to tell everyone that Song Min waited for a merchant named Hans when he was young. Song Ming purses his lips excitedly. He thanks Hans. Change of frame. Tavern. Song Min goes inside. Lula calls out to him. He looks at her. She asks if Song Min is moving out. He asks how she knows about this. Lula responds by shouting that Songmin cleaned his room for the first time in his life. She sits on the table and waves her legs. She asks why Songmin cleaned up if it was her responsibility. Songmin smiles and replies that he knows about it. Lula, with a sad look, says that she knows that aliens from other worlds, sooner or later, still leave the city of Xenois. Songmin says it is. Lula is silent. She turns away. She tells him to get lost and die a terrible death somewhere. Lula jumps up and runs away. The innkeeper Jack and Songmin look after her. Jack sighs. He tells Songmin not to hold a grudge because Lula is still young. He thinks about the fact that Songmin is even younger than Lula. Songmin replies that he understands. Jack wonders why Songmin is so mature beyond his years. He adds that it seems as if Songmin's mind is older than her body. Jack gives Songmin the green cloak. Songmin asks what it is. Jack reveals that he wore this cloak in his youth when he was a warrior. The shot shows a young Jack wearing armor and holding a sword. Jack adds that the cloak looks unsightly, but it has heat magic and magic that helps in sword fighting. He thinks it will be useful for Songmin. Songmin puts on his cloak and thanks him. Jack says that the cloak is too big for Songmin, so he can have it hemmed at a tailor. Jack puts his hand on Songmin's shoulder. He tells him that Songmin will go far. Jack adds that Songmin is the most capable out-of-class person Jack has ever met in his establishment. Jack smiles, tears in his eyes. He tells Songmin to take care of herself. Change of frame. Songmin walks down a city street. He hears someone running. Lula catches up with Songmin. She calls out to him. Songmin turns around. She stands there, trying to catch her breath. He's surprised. Lula wipes the sweat from her brow and tells Songmin to stop. She asks for forgiveness. Songmin asks again. She apologizes for wishing Songmin dead. He's surprised. Lula tells him not to die. Songmin is dumbfounded. He asks if she really ran that far just to tell him about it. Lula straightens up and remains silent. She bows her head. She says she's sorry to see Songmin go. She tells him to live long. She adds that if Songmin finds it difficult and unbearable, he can always return to Xenois. Songmin smiles. He thanks her. Lula says, looking down, that one day she looked at Songmin with completely different eyes. Her hands and voice begin to shake. She says she doesn't know what's wrong with her. She adds that at one point she began to think that she likes Songmin. Lula looks up at Songmin and smiles at him. There is a pause. Songmin replies that he noticed it. Lula says that's understandable. Songmin apologizes. Lula replies that there is nothing wrong. She asks him to take care of himself in a trembling voice. Songmin replies that he will not die, so Lula need not be afraid. He comes closer to her. Lula covers her face with her hands and cries. She agrees with a trembling voice. Songmin says goodbye to her. Lula says goodbye to him through tears. Change of frame. Songmin leaves the city. In his previous life, it took him 3 years to leave the city of Xenois. He only needed 1 year in this life. He thinks that he has no good memories left from his past life. He thinks about the merchant hands, the innkeeper Jack, Lula and Ho Young. He understands that in his new life he has received in full everything that he did not have before. He thinks that maybe someday he will be able to return to the city of Xenovis. Songmin remembers telling him to take care of himself. He answers that there is nothing to be afraid of, because he will not die. The frame shows the houses of the city of Xenois. Change of frame. Someone says that they have not met such young adherents for a long time. A man with a hood on his head and thorn branches around his body grins. He says the Mount Mercy community welcomes Songmin. The man asks what ban Songmin wants to impose on himself. Songmin stands in front of a man in a temple. He grimly thinks that he needs to become stronger in order to survive. Songmin remembers how Ho Young once asked him where they would meet after 10 years. She added that she didn't know the geography of the Area world, so she asked Songmin to decide for herself. The guy scratched his chin thoughtfully. He suggested meeting in Behenger. Songmin leaves Xenois. He thinks that there are still 9 years left before the agreed meeting with Ho Young, and he doesn't need to go to Behenger at the moment. He thinks about becoming a mercenary. Songmin points out that if that were the case, it would be the same life as in the past. Additionally, he believes he needs to sharpen his skills. He looks away thoughtfully. Songmin remembers Mount Mercy, shrouded in violet energy and sealed. The guy remembers that Mercy is the goddess of trials and hardships in the world of Iria. Through the community of priests of this goddess, who lives on Mount Mercy, a prohibition spell can be cast on a part of the body or on one of the senses. In this case, a purple seal appears on a part of the person's body. This allows a person to increase the effectiveness of their training 100-fold. Songmin looks back towards the forest. He thinks that Mount Mercy is somewhere nearby. The guy decides that he will go there. Mount Mercy is surrounded by a forest of purple trees and a lilac sky. Songming remembers a sinister man with a hood on his head and thorn branches around his body. The man turned out to be a priest of Mount Mercy. Songming arrived at Mount Mercy, received a ban from the priest and decided to train. 2 bans were imposed on Songming. The guy sits on his knees in the middle of the forest. A purple seal glows on his back. The first ban that Songming received cancels the ease. With him, Songming feels an extraordinary heaviness in everything, in his body and equipment. He is trying to pull a loaf of bread out of an oversized bag. Songming notes that both the bag and the bread have become heavier. He takes a bite from a loaf of bread. Then the guy winces, sitting on the ground on his knees. His eyes snap open at the feeling in his mouth. He bends over the ground and opens his mouth wide, spitting out a whole bunch of insects. Songming spits out the remnants of the sensation in his mouth. The pile of insects turns out to be a small piece of bread that he just took a bite of. The second ban is imposed on the sense of taste. Songming breathes heavily, trying to get rid of the vile taste in his mouth. He thinks that this is the worst thing, because the problem is not just a loss of taste. The guy falls back to the ground, mouth wide open. The prohibition does not allow him to taste good. Everything Songmin eats seems sickening and disgusting to him. Even the texture of food changes. Instead of a piece of bread, Songming felt slippery, moving insects in his mouth. It seemed to him as if he was chewing them alive and they were releasing juice. It represents a loaf of bread that turns into different insects. Songming looks tiredly into the sky, lying on the ground with his arms spread wide. He realizes that he will not be able to drink or eat with such a ban. He had no idea that it would be so terrible. The guy with doomed, empty eyes is wondering whether he should give up this idea of training in Mount Mercy. Songming looks at the lilac sky. He wonders if he really has to try so hard. He thinks that he could go to Behenger and become a mercenary there. In this way he would quickly grow to be class. Songmin thinks that it will still be better than what happened in his previous life. He lies wearily on the ground, closing his eyes. He thinks that he may be in over his head. Suddenly, Sun Min imagines Ho Young's stern and disappointed look. He instantly widens his eyes, filled with confidence. He abruptly grabs a loaf of bread lying nearby. Songming frantically eats the bread, ignoring the feeling of various nasty insects in his mouth. He quickly washes down the bread with water, which takes on a disgusting taste in his mouth. Songming exhales noisily. He grits his teeth against the discomfort. He tells himself that he must try. He mutters a curse towards the goddess Mersha. Suddenly, a purple silhouette of Mersha appears behind Songming. She orders him to shut up. He jumps up in fear and turns around sharply. The silhouette has disappeared and Songming can't see anyone. He looks back in bewilderment. A week passed surrounded by the purple forest of Mount Mercy. A deer walks through the forest and looks around. Songming waits for prey in the bushes with a spear in his hands. Then he abruptly takes off towards the frightened deer. The deer freezes in fear, but nothing happens. The animal opens its eyes and sees Songming slowly running towards it. Without any problem, the deer runs away. Songmin looks after the animal irritably. He wearily sinks to his knees, bowing his head. Songming thinks hard about the fact that he only ate water and bread all week, so he doesn't have enough strength. On Mount Mercy you need to survive with the restrictions imposed. Find shelter from the rain, sew clothes for yourself and get food. This is also part of the test. Living on Mount Mercy is very difficult. At night the temperature is significantly lower than during the day. In addition, local predators are fast and strong. Sun Ming, looking exhausted, sits down on the ground and leans against a tree trunk. He thinks that the ban on ease makes any action incredibly clumsy and difficult. And even if the hunt is successful, the ban on taste will not allow Songming to fully enjoy the prey. So a week has passed, and Songming's body is exhausted and weakened. Sitting on the ground, he looks at his legs spread wide apart. The guy planned to train on Mount Mercy for at least a couple of years. Despite this, he doesn't see the benefit of training harder as his body fails him more and more. Suddenly, Songmin's attention is drawn to a stone thrown by someone and landing nearby. The guy looks up to where the stone was thrown from. He sees a young girl with short hair wearing white clothes. She stands near a dead deer. A girl with a phlegmatic face waves her hand at him. She has Mersha's mark on her neck. Sun Min asks her who she is. He tensely remembers that on Mount Mercy a ban was imposed on all residents from harming each other. Considering this, Songming thinks he can relax. He asks what the girl's name is. She points her finger at Mersha's seal on her neck. Then she shows an X with her fingers. Songmin asks if this girl has a speech ban. This means she cannot talk. The girl nods. She throws the body of the dead deer towards Songmin. The guy recoils in fear from surprise. He is surprised to realize that this is the same deer that he failed to kill. The girl walks closer to Songmin with a long branch in her hands. She writes with the end of a branch directly on the ground. The girl reports that she has been watching Songmin for a couple of days. She adds that if he continues to live like this, he will die of hunger, so she decided to help. Songmin notes that the girl uses the writing system of the area world. He thanks for the help and asks if the girl really doesn't want anything in return. She replies that she doesn't need anything. Sunmin asks why she is doing this. The girl confidently says that she is helping Songmin because she is kind. Some time passes, so Songming met a certain young hunter and she, oddly enough, decided to help him. He was at a loss when she simply brought him the carcass of a dead deer. She said it was just because she was a kind person, and subsequently, whenever Songming was in trouble, she was always there to help out. He remembers how she helped him get out of the hole he fell into. Songming asked her name and the answer surprised him. The girl with short blonde hair and wearing white clothes was named Beak Sogo. Songming knows this name. In his previous life, he heard about her because she was famous. Her name means lightning. Beak Sogo was nicknamed that way because she was as fast as lightning itself. But Songming was not surprised that he met a future celebrity. The fact was that Beak Sogo would die in 10 years from a blow that pierced her chest, and she will die in the arms of the little demon Hwi Ho Young. Sun Min imagines the grim figure of Ho Young, with a bloody hand towering over the lifeless body of Beak Sogo. There are 3 rules of Mount Mercy. The first is that all adherents impose prohibitions on themselves. The second rule states that every 6 months, adherents are required to impose another ban on themselves. And the third rule prohibits adherents from harming each other. Songming sits on the ground with his back against a rock. He looks thoughtfully at the sky, trying to remember where Beak Sogo was killed. He wonders if it was in some kind of dungeon. Suddenly, Beak Sogo is near him and looks Sun Min straight in the face until he notices her. He then jumps up in fear and screams, asking where she came from. Beak Sogo writes on the rock with her finger that she has just arrived. Songmin looks stunned as the girl cuts the stone with her finger. She writes that she was worried about Songmin not eating again, so she came to him. The guy thanks her. He asks Beak Sogo why she doesn't use telepathy to speak. She shakes her head and carves the answer into the rock with her finger. She cannot, because telepathy is also prohibited by speech. Sungmin looks lower and notices that there is a large purple seal on Beak Sogo's hand. He asks the girl about it. Beak Sogo replies that she has a ban on using her left hand. She explains that this happened because 6 months had passed and she had to choose a new ban. Beak Sogo takes his own left hand by the wrist and looks at it. She adds that she doesn't feel very comfortable without her left hand. The girl then asks Songmin if he has a ban on lightness and taste. The guy confirms that yes, it is. Beak Sogo sadly replies that he can't imagine what it's like to be deprived of even the pleasure of food in such a terrible place. Songming chuckles exhaustedly at the mere memory of the disgusting taste of insects in his mouth. Sitting opposite Beak Sogo, the guy asks what prohibitions other adherents have imposed on themselves. The girl asks if Songmin is really interested in other adepts. After receiving an affirmative answer, Beak Sogo stands up and assures Songmin that he will introduce him to the others. She beckons him to come with her. The guy only has time to start thanking Beak Sogo, and she is already running away into the forest. Songmin stares after the girl in shock. He wonders how he can keep up with her. Beak Sogo returns at the same moment. She stops right in front of Songming and says that she forgot about his ban on lightness. Songmin mutters in response that even without the ban he would not have been able to keep up with Beak Sogo. The girl thoughtfully says that with a weighted body you need to work more on movement technique than on wielding a spear. Sungmin rises heavily to his feet under Beak Sogo's frown. He realizes that she spied on how he trained. The guy asks her to give lessons on movement techniques. Beak Sogo replies that despite her kindness, she cannot share what gives her an advantage in battle. Sungmin laughs and pretends to be joking, but he mentally curses. Beak Sogo then suddenly grabs the surprised guy and throws him over his shoulder with a straight face. When Songmin tries to protest, the girl blindsides him by calling him slow and declaring that she will carry him. The guy looks at her dumbfounded and tries to protest, but in vain. Beak Sogo takes off with Sun Min on her shoulder. After some time, they reach the rest of the adepts of Mount Mercy. Beak Sogo is immediately recognized and greets her. Then they ask who the boy is with her. Beak Sogo introduces Songmin to the others. Meanwhile, the main character himself covers his nose with his hand because of the stench. They stand opposite a girl named Scarlet Lessier, a future archmage. She has a ban on washing and changing clothes. She has red hair and an unwashed body, and an unpleasant odor emanates from her. She assumes that Song Min is studying martial arts and therefore calls him a worm. Another adept, an elderly man with gray hair, sits on a tree stump, leaning on his sword. His name is Deokbai Jun. He is the future ghost sword. He has a blindness to his left and right eyes. His muscular body is covered with scars. Deokbai invites Song Min to compete one day. Beak Sogo explains that after 6 months of testing on the mountain, only 4 adherents remained, and the rest could not stand it. Beak Sogo, who will be known as Lightning in the future, has restrictions on her left eye, left hand, and use of her voice. Song Ming looks at all the people gathered here in shock. He realizes that in the future they will become great masters. At the moment they are little known, but soon the fame of their skill will spread throughout the world of Iria. Another thought pops into his head, but he is distracted by Scarlet. She asks what Song Min's inhibitions are. He covers his nose from the bad smell and replies that he has a ban on lightness and taste. Scarlet frowns and notes that Song Ming has 2 bans, even though he hasn't spent half a year on Mount Mercy. She asks if he took them willingly from the very beginning. Scarlet then adds that Song Ming won't last long here. Deokbai calls out to her. She turns to look at him. Deokbai says that Sung Min came here to gain strength, so it's not surprising that he decided to make life difficult for himself. The man with a sinister, gambling grin says that Song Ming has set himself the goal of overcoming himself at any cost. The main character nervously agrees. Scarlet says that Deokbai sometimes scares people for no reason. A man leans on a sword. He says that different people gather on Mount Mercy, and after 6 months, only the 4 of them remained. Sitting on a tree stump, he adds that he wants to know how long Song Min will last and who will look after him. The guy nervously agrees. Scarlet turns to Beak Sogo, asking her if she is happy that now a second such eccentric has appeared on Mount Mercy, who took 2 prohibitions at once from the beginning of the journey. Beak Sogo calmly shows 2 fingers. Song Min points out that Beak Sogo apparently also started with 2 prohibitions. She turns to him and says that after meeting him, it is time to go back. Song Ming blinks at her in confusion. He asks where the 4th adept is, who survived more than 6 months on Mount Mercy. Deokbai intervenes in the conversation. He says he doesn't recommend getting to know Flam. Song Min asks about this man. Deokbai's expression becomes tense. He reluctantly replies that Flam is dangerous. Scarlet becomes visibly gloomier. Song Ming looks at them in confusion, not understanding what this means. 4 months passed on Mount Mercy. As soon as Song Min got used to the prohibitions, they became worse. He practices wielding a spear among the purple trees of the local forest. His body became even heavier, and the food tasted even more disgusting. However, Song Ming felt that he was getting stronger. He grips the handle of his spear with confidence as he trains. After 4 months of training, Song Ming improved the Violet Dawn path to 3 stars. Even though his skeletal enhancement surgery was of low grade, it greatly accelerated his development in the direction of martial arts. With quick swings of his spear, Song Ming cuts through the thick trunk of an old tree. The guy thinks that life on the mountain is full of difficulties, but they are worth it. The tree breaks into pieces after Song Ming's attack. He looks confidently at the results of his training. During the day, he used the improved 9th Heaven Spear technique, Song Ming style, and at night, he used the Violet Dawn path. Having completed his training, he sets off through the forest. Both the excessive weight of the body and the nauseating taste of food always haunted Song Ming. But every minute of her stay on Mount Mercy bore fruit. With a tense grin, he thinks about how his bones seem to break with every step, and his muscles almost tear while working with a spear. But Song Min is confident that he must endure all this. He gets a mental image of Ho Young's back in his head. He goes deep into the forest, resolutely thinking that he himself has set himself the goal of overcoming all the trials. Then the guy stops and looks at himself. He notes that he has grown in 4 months, so his clothes have become too small. Suddenly he hears a voice behind him, which notes his good use of the spear. Song Ming freezes in place and turns around abruptly. A young guy with blue hair is sitting on a cobblestone. He says he hasn't met Song Min before. He adds that he is pleased to meet you. The guy says that for the first time he meets someone of the same age on Mount Mercy. He says his name, Flam. Song Min purses his lips tensely as he looks at Flam, grinning provocatively. A new acquaintance asks what Song Min's name is. The main character remembers Scarlet, Deokbai, and Beak Sogo's words about Flam. They said that Flam is a genius. While everyone is working hard and on the verge of despair, they continue to struggle. He makes great progress and looks at the others, grinning. This is the extent of Flam's talents. Beak Sogo told Sun Min not to seek meetings with Flam, otherwise she might despair. Flam looks at the main character with a curious smile. Song Ming answers him with a gloomy, incredulous look. Flam comes closer and looks at Song Min's face with curiosity. Flam asks why the other guy got so tense if he just asked his name. Song Min says his name in confusion. Flam grins cheerfully, scratching his chin. He realizes that the others told Song Min about him. He asks why the other guy didn't meet him to get to know each other, because he really needs a friend the same age. Song Ming turns around irritably. He says he needs to go train. Flam looks after Song Min with disappointment. The main character is indignant, thinking that Flam cannot be a genius, especially compared to Ho Young. He decides not to waste time on such a simpleton as Flam and goes deep into the forest. Flam is silent for a while and then calls out to Song Min and asks him about the training. The main character mutters irritably in response that Flam must not understand anything. He is going to answer that the training will be with a spear. At this moment, Song Ming looks down at his empty hand, where the spear was just before. He turns around in shock and sees Flam holding a spear in his hands. Flam lightheartedly adds that he has never trained with a spear yet. He bows his head and smiles slyly as he looks at Song Ming and holds his spear in his hands. The main character freezes in shock, staring at Flam. It's unclear to him how the other guy was able to pull this off. The greatest humiliation for a warrior is to be deprived of his weapons. Song Ming's hand, which previously held the spear, begins to tremble. He wonders how Flam managed to do this. Instead of rage, he feels surprise. Flam raises his eyebrows in confusion. He asks why Song Ming is looking at him like that if he only borrowed a spear from him. He adds that he will return the spear later, once he has tried it out a bit. Flam takes the spear more comfortably. He says with a smile that he will repeat Song Ming's techniques. He recalls the improved technique of the Ninth Heaven Spear, Song Ming style, with a relaxed look. Flam remembers how Song Ming cut down a thick tree. He assumes a second stance and uses a lightning-fast splitting strike, swinging his spear quickly and deadly. Song Min watches this in shock. Large holes and cuts appear in thick tree trunks. A large layer of purple forest is cut down after one Flam attack. He looks around appraisingly, surprised and pleased. He looks back at Song Ming with a wide smile and notes that this is not a bad technique for a spear. Song Ming watches this, completely shocked. He realizes that Flam not only repeated the technique the first time, but also improved it. He wonders if Ho Young is capable of such a thing. He mutters that it was incredible. Flam grins sinisterly as he turns around. He smiles innocently and chuckles. He then cheerfully adds that he is better than Song Min. The main character freezes in place, trembling. Flam nonchalantly turns around and holds his spear behind his back. He says he doesn't understand why the others come here to train, because he can copy any of them and make everything even better. Flam turns around to look at Song Ming again. The guy wonders why no one can be like himself. He asks why all these people continue to train hard when they will never reach the same level. Song Ming looks at Flam in silent rage without blinking. Flam continues thoughtfully, looking down. He says that he asked Dokbi, Beak Sogo and Scarlet about this, but everyone is angry with him and drives him away. He adds that he is better than others with a sword, movement techniques and magic. Flam, with a slight smile, wonders why everything turned out this way. Song Ming remembers the others. He thinks that even now adepts are shining examples of mastery for him. However, Flam, looking at him innocently right now, is the true genius that outshines the rest. Real geniuses. Sun Min imagines a huge mountain, on the top of which Ho Young and Flam stand, and other people and Sun Min himself are climbing towards them. He asks himself how, as an ordinary person, he should relate to geniuses. He realizes that he feels different around Flam than he does around Ho Young. He recalls how openly she spoke about her genius, but never belittled Song Min himself with her superiority. He looks at Flam again. This guy is well aware of how his abilities are perceived by others, and therefore revels in his superiority. Flam leans against the shaft of the spear and innocently asks what prohibitions are imposed on Song Min. The young genius adds that if Sun Min talks about his prohibitions, then he will share his own, of which he has 4 of them. The main character does not answer and turns around, going deeper into the forests. He replies that he is not interested, because the most that can be there is a ban on modesty. Flam calls out to him, reminding him about the spear. He demonstrates the weapon, extending his hand forward. Song Ming grits his teeth in irritation as he stops. He immediately turns back to face Flam. The guy comes close to another adept, full of rage. He shouts that he doesn't need the spear and tells Flam to stay away. Another adept raises his eyebrows phlegmatically. He replies that Sun Min's aggressive reaction is strange because Flam didn't do anything wrong. He continues, adding that Song Ming came to the mountain in vain and it is better for him to go down. because his skills will still help make ends meet. Songming, unable to bear it, sharply swings his fist at Flam. His hand is stopped by an invisible barrier and Mersha's seal right in front of the other guy's face. Flam ignores the fist in front of him and calmly reminds them not to harm each other. He then raises his hand and touches Songming's palm. Flam tells the other guy that he's a weakling and asks what he was thinking when he swung. He continues, wondering if Songming did this with the knowledge that Flam would not be able to respond due to the ban. He effortlessly holds Songmin's wrist and twists his arm painfully, causing the protagonist to grit his teeth. Flam adds that life must be hard when you have to constantly contain your anger. He calmly places his spear in Songming's hand. With a slight grin, he adds that he knows that others gossip and avoid him. Behind Flam stands a gloomy Beak Sogo. Flam smiles harmlessly, turning to her, and shrugs. He says that Songming started it first, while Flam himself simply returned the spear to him. The main character stands at a distance, tightly gripping the shaft of the weapon. Flam turns to him. He lightheartedly says that Songming's technique was incredibly good, but the execution was poor. Beak Sogo stands next to him with a gloomy expression on his face. Flam continues, noting that the higher the level of technology, the more difficult it is in practice. He says that Songming shouldn't hope for anything with his meager abilities, and his maximum would be 6 stars for this technique. Songming is literally shaking with rage and he bites his lower lip hard. Flam says that the more difficult the test a person undertakes during his stay on Mount Mercy, the better the gifts that the goddess will shower the adept with. The more a person complicates his stay on the mountain, the faster he achieves perfection. Flam doesn't have time to continue because Beak Sogo, who came up behind him, covers his mouth with her hand. He tries to break free from her grip. Songming watches them from afar. Suddenly, Beak Sogo looks away from Flam and looks up at the other guy with a worried look. At this moment, Songming has already taken off and runs away, gritting his teeth. Beak Sogo tries to call out to him, but the speech ban prevents her from doing so. Songmin storms off as Flam stares after him blankly and Beak Sogo tries to get him to come back. All the thoughts of the main character are obsessively occupied by one word, talent, as if spoken by the voices of different people. He tries to escape from these thoughts about talent. In a fit of rage, he bites his lower lip so hard that it begins to bleed. From his eyes, Songming raises his head to the sky and loudly calls out to the goddess Mercy. She appears behind him like a purple ghost and allows him to say what he wants. Songming, overcoming tears and anger, clenches the handle of the spear until it bleeds, and loudly asks the goddess for a new band for himself. The environment changes dramatically. A small piece of land floats in the air in the middle of endless space. Songming looks around in confusion, tears frozen in his eyes. He wonders where he is. Opposite him, he suddenly notices the purple silhouette of a girl. She explains that they are in her abode. Goddess Mercy wears bandages on her arms, neck and legs, and a gray dress over them. Ivy branches wrap around her body. Mercy says she is glad to meet Songmin and says her name. The main character wipes blood from his lip with his forearm. He asks if the girl in front of him is really the goddess Mercy. She tucks her legs under her, levitating. The goddess says that she heard Songming shouting, screaming and cursing. She adds that he shouldn't anger her like this in the future. She asks if he wants a new ban. Songming agrees tensely, looking at Mercy. She looks the guy over, assessing what inhibitions he already has. She notices the ban on taste and lightness. With a curious grin, the goddess notes that Songming's hardships are unbearable, but he still wants to get new ones. The guy, after a short silence, replies that he will endure everything. Mercy chuckles looking at him. Then the goddess suddenly calls Songming returned from the clutches of death. The main character is instantly overcome by a wave of trembling, and he freezes in shock. He screams, asking how Mercy knows this. She grins sinisterly, her eyes and the seal on her forehead glowing bright purple. She replies that she sees everything as it corresponds to the goddess. Mercy says that human life is short, and this rule cannot be broken. The frame shows skeletons of people and animals. The goddess continues by saying that those who broke the rule are called gods. The shot shows a man breaking through the golden shackles and being filled with enormous power. Mercy notes that Songming is not a god at all, and moreover, he is also a violator of the rules of the universe, because after his death he returned to the past. Songming looks away irritably with his eyebrows furrowed. The goddess levitates upside down, her long hair hanging in the air. The main character asks her if the fact of violating the rules of the universe causes him any harm. Mercy replies that everything has a beginning and an end. She notes that this should be so, but since Songming defied death, his soul will pay a high price for this. A glowing orange thread appears between Mercy's index fingers and tangles into a ball in the middle. The goddess adds that one will have to pay not during life, but after death, and the torment will last hundreds of millions of hours. She chuckles cheerfully as she continues to levitate upside down in front of Song Ming. Mercy adds that the main character got his life at such a price. The guy swallows tensely after the goddess's words. Then he narrows his eyes, pursing his lips. He says he doesn't care what happens after he dies. After some time, Song Ming again finds himself on Mount Mercy. Beak Sogo stands in front of him. She has a surprised expression on her face. The guy sits near a thick tree trunk, hugging himself by the shoulders and shaking. Beak Sogo asks him if he has added a new band to himself. The main character, still shaking, smiles forcedly. He confirms that he has added a new band to himself and asks if Beak Soguo is worried. The girl frowns irritably, looking at the guy. She then exhales and asks what Song Ming has added to the band. The guy is silent for some time, shaking near the tree. Then he answers that he chose a ban on warmth and restful sleep. Beak Sogo's eyes widen in shock as he looks at him. She begins to resent Song Min's reckless act, because the prohibitions on feelings and emotional comfort are the worst. With an incredibly exhausted face, Song Min smiles forcefully, looking somewhere into the emptiness in front of him. The ban on feeling heat meant that Song Min could no longer keep himself warm. Even next to the fire, he constantly shivered from the cold. And the ban on restful sleep made it so that memories of his life on Earth and his parents, his fears and insecurities, came to him during sleep and deprived him of peace. The parents appeared as frightening, crying silhouettes. The uncertainty resembled a maliciously grinning face. All of this made Song Ming feel surrounded by lurking dangers. Sleep was no longer a refuge from worries. Song Ming lost the peace and satisfaction of sleep. Beak Sogo exhales in annoyance, calling Sun Min an idiot. She attacks him with accusations, asking why he did it. She adds that with his good inclinations, he would soon reach heights anyway. Shaking from the cold, Song Min mutters in response that he has no makings. Beak Sogo pauses, raising an eyebrow in confusion. Bowing his head, with a blank look, the guy repeats again that he has no inclinations. Beak Sogo looks at him in surprise. She begins to analyze what she saw. She recalls that despite Song Ming's achievements, even with the past bans, his skill growth still did not accelerate. She notices that the guy has a lot of skills, but it seems that he was really born mediocre. Song Ming sits on the ground near a tree trunk, wrapped in a cloak due to the cold. Beak Sogo wonders who he is. The main character says that he has set a goal for himself, meaning the desire to defeat Ho Young. He continues by admitting that he does not have enough talent to achieve his goal. Stressed by the weight of his inhibitions, he looks up at Beak Sogo with an exhausted but stubborn gaze. He tells her not to think that he ran for new restrictions only after talking with Flam. Sung Min says that Flam simply showed him the next step towards his goal. He clenches his hand into a shaking fist. The guy says that he, devoid of any inclinations, needs to reach the level of talented people like the rest, so he must do the impossible. Song Min continues to sit near the tree trunk with his head down. Beak Sogo stands in front of him. She looks down at him, lost in thought. The guy purses his lips, continuing to be exhausted because of the prohibitions he has taken on. But he has a stubborn look. A satisfied smile appears on Beak Sogo's lips. She squats down in front of the guy. The girl nods, saying that Song Ming seems to have set a high goal for himself. She smiles at him playfully, narrowing her eyes slightly. Beak Sogo says that she can understand him because she has set herself the goal of becoming the strongest in the whole world. Song Ming raises his eyebrows at her words. Beak Sogo asks him if he remembers the request to teach him the technique of movement. Sung Min brushes it off as just joking. The girl closes her eyes. She states that she will teach Song Min. He jumps up and down in shock, not believing his ears. Beak Sogo takes the secret manuscript out of his pocket and places it on the ground in front of the surprised guy. This martial art is both a mystical teaching and a movement technique. This is everything you need to know to develop movement techniques. The teaching looks like a nondescript brown book. It is called The Flight of the Soul Without a Shadow. Song Min picks up the book and studies it with a surprised expression. He thinks that this is a high art, comparable to the Path of the Violet Dawn and the Spear of the Ninth Heaven. Confused, he asks the girl why she is giving it to him. Beak Sogo replies that he doesn't know. She adds that if Song Min dies from hardship on Mount Mercy, then she won't be able to do anything about it. However, she doesn't think the guy will give up. She sits down on the ground next to the surprised Song Ming, leaning her back against the tree trunk. Looking up at the sky, she says that she might be doing this because she likes Song Min. Before giving the second reason, Beak Sogo mysteriously falls silent and looks at the guy. Then she smiles, hiding her eyes behind her hair. She adds that she may be doing this simply because she is kind. The main character exclaims irritably that Beak Sogo is just making fun of him. A system notification appears stating that Songming has learned a technique called Shadowless Soul Flight. A system table with Songmin's characteristics appears. Its level is low. Among the guy's previous skills, a new one appears, which is called the Soul Flight technique without a shadow. It has 1 star. The main character is in a dark space. He holds a spear with purple energy floating around it. He uses the improved 9th Heaven Spear technique, Songming style, Move 1. A heartbreaking death blow. He quickly swings his spear at Ho Young, who deflects his blow with a single swing of her hand. Red energy appears around her palm. She looks at Songmin with disapproval and displeasure, her face gloomy. The guy clenches his teeth in rage and indignation. Ho Young abruptly pushes Sunmin back with another wave of his hand. He once again uses the improved 9th Heaven Spear technique, Songming style. Purple energy begins to accumulate around the spear. He then uses movement 5. He rushes forward in a rage, his eyes wide and the blade of his spear thrusts forward. The movement is called a deadly flash. Ho Young stands calmly in front, not even moving. She stops Songmin's attack by blocking with her right forearm. Songming's spear and both hands shatter into small pieces. Ho Young says gloomily that she is disappointed in him. The guy looks in horror at his hands, which turn into pieces that look like crushed stone. Ho Young asks if this is all Sungmin has achieved in 10 years. She comes up to meet him. The girl continues, saying that she regrets her decision to start teaching the guy martial arts. She adds that 10 years of effort have gone to waste. Her right hand rests on the shocked Songmin's stomach. Ho Young says he doesn't have to do this anymore. She's going to take away everything she taught him and he won't see Ho Young again. There is a crunch. Under the pressure of the girl's hand, Songmin's stomach also turns into small fragments and begins to bleed. She watches him spit out blood and says that she will destroy his danchin. Ho Young calls this the end of martial arts training for Sungmin. He shudders in hellish pain. Ho Young says goodbye to him indifferently. She turns her back to him and walks away. Songmin tries to extend his hand after her and asks her to stop. He calls her name as the purple thick liquid slowly sucks him away. Blood flows from the guy's mouth and eyes as he frantically asks Ho Young to stop. He shouts after her that he can still become a warrior. He calls her name again. There is a sharp change in the situation. Songming opens his eyes with a noisy sigh as he lies on the ground. He sits up abruptly with traces of tears in his eyes and breathes noisily, trying to calm down. He looks at his unharmed hands. The realization dawns on him that it was just a dream. The guy exhales tensely, rejoicing that everything was not real. Suddenly, Scarlet appears behind him and asks who Ho Young is. Songming jumps up in fear and turns around, staring at Scarlet. The girl asks if Ho Young is his girlfriend. She leans closer and asks him to show him 2 new banning seals. Sungmin recoils because of how much Scarlet stinks. She grabs the guy by the head and lifts his upper eyelid to find Mersha's seal there. The girl notes that Songmin really took a ban on restful sleep. The guy's eyes begin to water because of the terrible smell that Scarlet exudes. She continues calmly, noting that Songming also took the heat ban. She says that he is no longer a tenant because he took all the hardest things. Songming staggers to the side, vomiting on the ground. The girl asks in confusion what's wrong with him and if he's sick. Dokbi replies that the guy is throwing up because Scarlet came too close. She turns around indignantly, saying that she actually came to support. Dokbi moves back because of how bad Scarlet's breath is. He asks the girl not to turn to face him. Songmin looks at the two, remembering that one day Scarlet will become an archmage and Deokbai will be a ghost sword. The guy wipes his mouth with his hand and turns to them. He apologizes and asks why they came. Scarlet turns around and cheerfully announces that she and Dokbi have come to help. She adds that Beak Sogo really asked them to help Songmin. The future archmage recalls how another girl asked for this, standing opposite her and holding her nose with her hand. Sungmin is surprised by Beak Sogo's action. Scarlet reveals that she bought something for her boyfriend. She pulls out 4 magic scrolls with a satisfied grin. Scarlet reports that aliens from other worlds can study magic through scrolls, which is very convenient. Songmin listens to her, covering his nose and mouth with his hand to escape the stench. Scarlet enthusiastically begins to talk about magic. Dokbi grins briefly under his mustache. Some time passes. Deokbai stands in front of Songmin with a sword in his hands and moves closer. He says he hopes the guy can handle a little training. Songming, swaying, comes out to meet with a spear in his hands. They stand opposite each other in the middle of a purple forest. Scarlet taught Songmin 4 spells. The first is called Clearing the Mind. The guy puts his finger to his temple and uses magic words. This spell cleanses the mental field polluted and confused by nightmares. The tired and empty eyes of the protagonist brighten again, and highlights appear in them. The second spell makes Song Ming faster and stronger. He uses it. Thin threads of golden energy appear around his body. This spell slightly alleviates the effects of light ban. Song Min uses a spear attack, which Deokbai parries with lightning speed. They start training. After some time, things are already approaching sunset. Song Ming lies exhausted on the ground, breathing heavily. The third spell helps when you are exhausted. Song Ming puts his hand to his chest. A small blue spark appears. The guy sits down on the ground with a heavy sigh. This spell should not be abused because it can take away so much of your life energy that it will be fatal. Song Min thinks gloomily that he will have to use this spell to survive the hellish training. Deokbai raises his eyebrows in disappointment, standing opposite the main character with a sword in his hand. He says that Song Ming again couldn't stand even 100 seconds of training against a blind old man with a sword. The guy sighs and says that next time he will try to hold out longer. Song Ming flinches suddenly due to a sudden stabbing pain in his chest. He curls up into a ball and shakes violently. Deokbai raises an eyebrow in confusion, wondering if Sun Min is shivering from the cold again. He comes closer and with quick movements presses on 2 points on the guy's body. The blood in the guy's vessels flows faster again. Deokbai asks if it helped. Song Min confirms, lowering his head in a relaxed manner. Deokbai Jun pressed on the blood vessels, and this stimulated metabolic processes, which helped alleviate the inhibition of the sensation of heat. Deokbai gets up and says it's time for him to go. Song Min raises his head in confusion. The man walks away, telling the guy to take care of himself, because otherwise Deokbai will have no one to train with. The main character in confusion throws gratitude after the departing swordsman. He exhales noisily with the knowledge that if he had not been helped, he would not have survived. Song Ming silently looks at the orange sunset sky. He lies on the dark ground, thinking about everything. He thinks about how he got a chance to live his life again, and so many people helped him. His gaze clears. A sudden realization hits him. He jumps up to sit on the ground. A convulsive thought about whether it is possible that what is happening is somehow unnatural flashes through his head. He remembers all the people he met and who helped him. He wonders why they were all so kind to him. From his past life, he remembers that in the world of Iria there was no place for compassion. Song Min wonders what is going on. The environment changes to show Scarlet and Deokbai. The girl calls out to the swordsman so that he pays attention to her. He responds, noting that he senses her presence from afar. The girl frowns irritably, declaring that as soon as she descends from Mount Mercy, she will burn Deokbai like a match. She adds that there is nothing critical about the fact that she has not washed for a couple of days. As she gets closer, she asks if Deokbai trained with Song Min. The swordsman replies that yes, and notes that despite the heavy movements, Song Ming is making progress day by day. Scarlet asks with a grin why Deokbai is suddenly trying so hard for some boy. She adds that a man is not interested in anything other than martial arts. Deokbai simply replies that he was asked for help after all. He notes that Scarlet made the scrolls for Song Min herself. He asks what happened to her. Scarlet looks at the man thoughtfully. She replies that she doesn't know, but when she sees Song Min in front of her, she can't remain indifferent. At the same time, the main character continues to sit on the ground, thinking. A dark violet energy, invisible to anyone, condenses around him. An ominous breeze blows past the guy's ear. Song Ming then shrugs nonchalantly and says there's no need to complicate things. He is sure that he is just lucky. Violet energy remains hovering around the guy. 6 months later on Mount Mercy, Song Ming trains with all his might in the forest, swinging his spear in his trembling hand. He breathes heavily, clutching the handle tightly. His hair has grown a little longer. The guy then slumps to the ground and drops his weapon, too tired. He bows his head and tries to catch his breath. Then a shadow looms over his face. When he looks up, he sees Flam watching him ominously. The guy greets, calling Song Min a larva. He then calmly adds that he thought the main character would give up after 6 months, but now a year has passed and Song Min is still on the mountain. The other guy ignores Flam and turns away. Flam gives him a carefree and interested look. In one jump he finds himself near Song Min and asks why he is silent if they have not seen each other for so long. The main character ignores what was said, breathing heavily and sweating after a grueling workout. Flam asks Song Min to say something, but he doesn't answer. Then Flam finally notices the seal on the other guy's neck and realizes that he took the vote ban. Flam laughs at this, saying that Song Ming took the most convenient ban because the 6-month period has passed. He blocks the main character's path, continuing to jabber. He says that he expected Song Min to choose only the most difficult prohibitions, but he did not comply. The main character swings sharply and attacks with a spear, almost hitting Flam with the blade. At this point, Flam notes that over the past 6 months, Song Min has changed beyond recognition. His strikes and movements are precise and flawless. The shot shows how the main character controls the spear, making quick movements and attacks. Flam also notes that the movements Beak Sogo described were perfected by Song Min. The blue-haired guy tilts his head to the side in intrigue, scratching his chin. He says that it seems that even a larva can crawl far if it does it long and determinedly. He chuckles, asking if this is all the main character is capable of even with 5 prohibitions. At this moment, Song Ming suddenly takes off from his place, swinging his spear, and rushes past Flam. He breathes noisily, continuing his workout as if there was no one else around. Flam stares at him, eyes wide. Then he calmly raises his eyebrows. In the next second, Flam intercepts the spear shaft and stops the movement. He darkly asks Song Min why he is ignoring him. Flam adds that not having a voice is no excuse because he can see everything from his face and lips. Song Ming breathes heavily, not even looking at the person who disturbed his attention. Then he turns around and, with a cheeky grin, asks if Flam really has nothing better to do. This instantly sets the other guy off. He looks ominously at the man in front of him and says that this won't work. He adds that only Flam himself can be arrogant. Song Min indifferently and calmly asks if Flam is going to kill him with a prohibition on violence. He slowly pulls the spear out of the other's grip. At this moment, Flam suddenly grabs and pulls out the handle of the spear, causing Song Min to lose his balance. He falls, hitting his face and especially his nose on the ground. Flam looks down on it. He laughs loudly, saying that this is a pathetic sight because Song Ming is crawling on the ground just like a maggot. The main character slowly rises, resting his forearm on the ground. A trickle of blood slowly flows from his nose. He guesses that it turns out that indirect damage can be caused. Flam continues mockingly. He raises his hand over the blade of the spear, causing it to fill with blue energy similar to flames. He asks if Song Min can do such a thing. The main character looks in surprise at the spectacle in front of him and realizes that the blue energy is the kai of the weapon. With one swing of his spear, Flam plunges the blade into a thick tree trunk. He asks how much longer Song Min can hold out. He says that regardless of time, he will never be able to reach the level of a genius like Flam himself. The tree trunk begins to collapse due to the bright blue kai energy in the weapon's blade. Flam adds that the world is unfair, because while someone is forced to cut their way to the top with sweat and blood, someone can easily run there. He adds that Song Min puts in so much effort for nothing. He asks if this makes sense and if the other guy will continue. Song Ming looks at the person in front of him indifferently and calmly. He answers without unnecessary emotion that he will. Flam is absolutely stunned, his eyes widen in surprise. Song Ming explains with just his lips that one can despair and lament because he does not have a single drop of innate talent. He thanks Flam for coming because he was bored alone. Flam stands opposite with a surprised face, still holding the spear blade raised into the tree trunk. The main character adds that even though his achievements are ridiculous for another guy, he can work hard and consistently, unlike geniuses like Flam. He states that no matter the amount of time he has to spend crawling around like a maggot, he will continue. He smiles ominously and extends his hand forward, a stubborn red light burning in his eyes. Song Ming says that Flam can continue to laugh, but the day will come when a spear will pierce him, and then it won't be funny at all. Silence reigns. Song Ming points his finger at the tense Flam standing opposite him, holding a spear with one hand. The blade of the spear begins to glow blue brighter than before, causing the tree to slowly collapse. Flam hums thoughtfully, raising an eyebrow and looking at Song Min. The main character stands tall, exuding confidence and stubbornness. Flam, with a hint of mockery, replies that he will wait for that day. He starts talking about what will happen if Song Min gives up and starts crying. The main character interrupts him, assuring him that he doesn't even have to hope for it. A month later, the date came for Song Ming to spend a year as an adept on Mount Mercy. This meant that a new ban had to be chosen. The main character found himself opposite the purple ghost of the goddess Mersha. Without hesitation, he chose the hearing ban. This was one of the most painful prohibitions. From now on, his hearing was constantly filled with a terrible noise, to which it was impossible to get used to. It was impossible to hide from this sound by covering your ears. 6 prohibitions. Song Ming continued to train with the spear, honing his skills with a stubborn look. He spent every day on the edge of survival, and yet his hands did not tremble when he fought with a spear. A block similar to a quick swing of a weapon shrouded in purple energy. A hold that resembles a quick swing of a spear in a circle. A blow, sharp and precise, in the right place. Improved 9th Heaven Spear Technique, Song Ming Style. Path of the Violet Dawn. Technique Flight of the Soul without a shadow. Song Ming practiced them with meditations that condense the violet energy around his body. Training with Dokbi using weapons. Training with Beak Sogo, honing speed and movements. There were no training sessions with Scarlet because she couldn't help. The shot shows the main character walking through the dark forest of Mount Mercy. The stronger Song Ming became. The heavier his body, the more disgusting the food, the worse the nightmares, the worse the cold and the unbearable tinnitus. The shot shows a tired guy with chapped lips and a blank look, but sometimes it still helped and distracted me in time. For example, in the moments when Flam came and bothered him with his annoying boasting. Slowly, like a larva, Song Ming developed. The situation abruptly changes to the abode of Mercia, in which the surprised protagonist finds himself. The goddess stands in front, turning her back to the guy. He asks why she called him, because the new 6 months have not yet passed. Mercy slowly turns around with a soft expression on her face. She addresses Song Min by name and congratulates him on passing the tests. The guy asks in confusion what kind of test it is and what it means. Suddenly, Flam appears out of nowhere and freezes right in front of Song Min's face. He states that he will explain everything now. The main character recoils in fear when he sees Flam. Another guy stands in front of the goddess and smiles just like her. Mercy explains that Flam's very existence is a test. She asks with a smile if Song Min understands what's going on. The realization surprises the guy. He remembers that Beak Sogo, Scarlet and Deokbai Jun subsequently passed the test on Mount Mercy and became celebrities in the world of Aria. But Song Ming had never heard of anyone named Flam. If Flam had come out of this mountain, he would have been even more famous than the rest thanks to his talent. Sung Ming mutters that he suspected something, but he couldn't even imagine that Flam wasn't actually real. The blue-haired guy comes closer and leans down slightly, scratching his chin. He says that the whole meaning of his existence is in order to drive adherents to despair with his achievements. Song Ming frowns in surprise. Flam continues, listing all the adepts. He says that even those who were very gifted despaired when they saw how easy everything came to Flam. They tried to avoid him and turned their noses up. Flam comes closer, looking into Song Min's eyes. He adds that despite the fact that the main character was born without talent, he did not turn away from Flam, but rather made it his motivation. Flam notes that Song Ming took on even more difficulties, which was not the best decision. However, the blue-haired guy was unable to make Song Min despair. Flam steps back, aligning himself with Mercy, and they begin to speak in sync. The goddess says that she liked Song Ming's recklessness. The guy opens his eyes in surprise in response to her words. Mercy says that's all. She orders Song Min not to tell others about who Flam really is, otherwise she will bring her wrath down on him. She asks if Song Min wants to continue the path of testing on her mountain. Frowning suspiciously, the main character replies that of course he wants to. Mercy closes his eyes and reveals that the reward will be waiting for Song Min when he leaves the mountain. Suddenly, she opens her eyes wide and offers to take Song Ming's soul in exchange for strength that he would not have achieved even after 100 years of cultivation. She adds that she could use such a quirky soul. The guy immediately indignantly refuses such a deal. Mercy chuckles contentedly and asks if Sun Min is really going to continue working and slowly crawl towards his goal. The guy freezes in place with his eyes wide open. He always hated the word work. The starting point is different for everyone. No matter how hard he worked, he could not keep up with the talented. He imagines himself sitting in the distance, stubbornly reaching out to the advancing geniuses like Dobby, Scarlet, and Beak Sogo. But talented people must also work. Standing furthest away is Ho Young, looking forward in front of her. Song Ming hated those who, regardless of the inclinations and initial conditions of a person, that you just need to not be lazy and work on yourself. On the other hand, Song Ming really wanted to work. He imagines his scarred hand reaching out towards a bright golden flash in the distance. He spent his past life clinging to his lack of talent as an excuse for everything. That's why he always remained in place and achieved nothing. He remembers Ho Young's question, which was what kind of new life he has. He remembers himself as a little boy who just appeared in this world. His new life consists of many fateful meetings, which include, for example, Ho Young and Beak Sogo. It is also the absence of excuses and indulgences to oneself. Breaking away from the comfort of excuses, Song Ming was forced to move forward. He thinks about Mercia's seal. Only in this life does he truly work on himself and overcome himself. Song Ming bares his teeth and agrees that he will crawl until the very end. In this life he fell in love with the word work. Mercy smiles very contentedly, narrowing his eyes. Then she suddenly turns around under the gaze of the confused protagonist. She says that now there will be a short monologue. They are in the middle of her space-like abode. Mercy says that in the world of Aria there are no coincidences, so everything has a reason and a beginning. Iria calls on aliens from other worlds. The shot shows two men emerging from portals into the world of Iria. One of the men looks like a sorcerer with a staff, the second holds a sword. Mercy adds that aliens are given advantages in the form of skills. She wonders why all this is happening and what is the reason. Songming thinks about the goddess's words in confusion. He understands that this is not just a monologue, but that she is talking to him. He wonders if this means that Mercy is saying something that he is not supposed to know, and therefore is speaking indirectly. Songming looks at the goddess's back. She is silent for a while, looking gloomily ahead while the main character looks at her in confusion. Mercy states that Songmin's return means that someone or something wants it and something incredible is about to happen. She tells him that since he's back, he should prepare for the reason why he was given a second chance. There is a short silence. Mercy suddenly shudders and feels the condensing energy around her. She looks forward tensely, feeling that something is stopping her. Suddenly her abode is covered with red cracks. Mercy raises her hand and orders something to stop, because this is her abode. She repeats the order and adds that otherwise she will destroy the uninvited guest. The crack slowly closes back and disappears. Songmin watches what is happening in confusion, where she orders him to return immediately. She lowers her hand and turns around, looking a little tired. The goddess says that Songming doesn't have much time left, so he needs to go back and continue his training. He tries to stop him, but Mercy interrupts him with a wave of his hand. Songming disappears from her abode. The goddess feels her hand trembling. She sees this and wonders if Songmin will be able to stop the end of the world. 2 days later, the sixth ban that the main character took was the ban on smell. He thinks that nothing could be worse than this. Now the stench from Scarlet's hair constantly irritated his sense of smell. Songming is sitting in the forest when he hears someone approaching. He looks up and sees Beak Sogo. She asks if maybe Songmin should have chosen a different ban. She comes closer. She has bruises under her eyes and looks tired. Songming replies that the worse the ban, the better the reward. He adds with an exhausted look that when he swallows saliva, he almost feels sick, but otherwise everything is quite tolerable. In addition to those already known, Beak Sogo now had a ban on hearing and taste. Her constant suffering from these prohibitions was great. Now it was much harder for her than with the previous bans. She exhales exhaustedly with a forced smile on her lips. Beak Sogo says she only now realized what Sungmin went through. She adds that having feelings taken away is terrible. The main character just laughs nervously, thinking that he has a ban on hearing, smell, and taste. Beak Sogo then gets Songmin's attention by telling him that she has something to tell him. He looks up at her with interest. She stands opposite him as she says she plans to leave Mount Mercy soon. She has a calm expression and a confident look. Songming is a little surprised and a little confused. He notes that for Beak Sogo the tests of Mount Mercy were unnecessary. Her talent already outshines everyone. He imagines the girl standing proudly and crushing Songmin himself with her foot. He looks at Beak Sogo, remembering that she has been testing for 2 years and must have already achieved all her goals. He asks if that means she's leaving. The girl nods confidently with a calm expression on her face. With slight concern, she asks if Songmin is going to leave. He replies that he still plans to stay. Beak Sogo looks down, her face becoming thoughtful and serious. They are silent for a while, just standing opposite each other. Songmin asks if they will ever meet again. Beak Sogo replies that she is confident that this will happen. With a slightly sad but hopeful smile, she tilts her head to the side and sighs. The girl looks at Songmin's sad expression. She thinks that they have known each other for a whole year. She notices that the little boy who was the main character has grown up and is already as tall as her. Beak Sogo thinks about everything for a while. Her worry increases a little when she realizes that Songmin might die here without her. She thinks that a few more prohibitions will become fatal for the guy. She bites her bottom lip in regret. Beak Sogo remembers that she never taught Songmin the full mastery of shadowless soul flight. The thought flashes through her mind of staying a little longer for this. Suddenly, as if reading her thoughts, Songming interrupts them. With a confident and calm look, he declares that he can handle it himself. Beak Sogo's eyes widen in surprise. The main character smiles slightly, raising an eyebrow. He says that thanks to Beak Sogo he managed to hold out for so long, and now he can cope on his own. He adds that the girl probably has plans and she doesn't need to stay on Mount Mercy just because of him. He thanks her for everything she has done for him. Beak Sogo looks a little embarrassed and flattered. She even opens her mouth a little in surprise. Songmin adds that if it weren't for her help, he would no longer be alive. Beak Sogo stops worrying and smiles with relief. She suddenly comes closer to the guy and with her right hand pulls him by the head to hug him. Sungmin freezes in surprise and blushes deeply as Beak Sogo puts his arm around his shoulder. At first he doesn't know how to react, too embarrassed. Then he calms down, relaxes, and his gaze softens. He doesn't return the hug, but leans his head toward Beak Sogo's shoulder. After some time, the girl pulls away and takes a step back. She says she has faith that Song Min can handle everything. She adds that he is the strongest person she has ever met in her entire life. The main character smiles happily at her words. He asks why Beak Sogo thinks that way. She replies that it is because Song Min never gives up. The guy smiles uncertainly at such words. He says that this is not true, because he constantly fell into despair. He adds that he just somehow managed to get up and move on. Beak Sogo grins, looking up at him. She says that this is exactly Song Ming's main strength. She adds that she couldn't stand it when she met Flam face to face. The girl then finally uses her voice to address Song Min. Mersha's seals are slowly disappearing from her body, signaling the end of the restrictions placed on her. She tells the main character to take care of himself and not die. Song Min confidently replies with his lips that he will never die. After that, Beak Sogo left. Eokbai Jun and Scarlet also soon left the mountain. Song Ming was left all alone. He had lost the habit of feeling lonely, but was forced to be left without people around again. He remembered what he was like before he met anyone. The guy remembers himself on the first day of his new life in the world of Iria. He didn't trust anyone, but now he realized that a person cannot exist alone. He remembers all the kind people who met him on the way, including Scarlet, Dokbi, Lula, Ho Young, Beak Sogo, Jack, and Hans. Song Min understands that if it weren't for them, he would have died. He looks with sudden awareness at the sky, where the light is pouring from. From behind the dense dark crowns of trees, a bright sky filled with sunlight can be seen. Song Ming tilts his head to look up. He realizes that something has changed in his heart. The guy smiles sincerely and relaxed, feeling his heartbeat in his chest. He feels as if an invisible wall has fallen. Song Min takes a firm and confident step forward. At that moment he no longer felt either heaviness or stench, no longer heard any noise. The feeling of freedom was fleeting, but it seemed like it lasted forever. He confidently rushes forward into the dark forests. The usual views suddenly changed. The guy realizes that this was natural, because he from the past has finally changed. Song Ming confidently lunges forward with his spear engulfed in purple energy. Following him, the world around him changed. After some time, summer came. A large insect crawls along a gray tree trunk. The singing of cicadas was heard. Sun Min remembers that 7 years later, Beak Sogo will meet Hwichai Ho Young in the dungeon and will be killed by her. He imagines Ho Young with a bloody hand, standing grimly in front of the dead body of another girl. Sung Min decides that he must return the favor to Beak Sogo and save her from death. He practices swinging his spear and hones his skills. At the end of the blow, the blade of the spear stops in the trunk of the tree along which the insect was crawling. The sharp edge of the weapon freezes a centimeter from the frightened cicada. The insect immediately flies away. Song Ming turns his attention to it, realizing that it is a cicada. Cicada larvae lie in the ground for 10 years before developing into adults. Sung Min realizes that he only has 7 years to prevent Beak Sogo's murder. He wonders what he can achieve during this time and whether he can achieve it at all. He lowers his arms along his body and looks up. Then he interrupts himself and grins confidently, deciding that he definitely can, and it cannot be otherwise. Although every day brought new achievements, this was not enough for the main character. He honed his spear skills. He tried to increase the intensity of his training over and over again. He cut back on his sleep and used the extra time to train with the spear. Soon it was time for the next ban. Sung Min remembers once asking Deokbai how he managed to navigate without sight. The man then replied that it was not difficult. You just need to focus on your other senses and remember your environment well. Therefore, the next prohibition that Song Ming chose was vision. He received 2 seals of Mersha, 1 for each eye. The world has plunged into darkness. The only thing the main character had to rely on was the sense of touch. A week later he was able to move around a little. Hearing did not help him in this dark world, because it was filled with deafening sounds. One day the noise began to sound like cicadas singing. In the flow of this sound, Song Ming forgot about the passage of time. The shot shows a bleached silhouette of a guy training with his weapon. He continued to work with the spear. His body was used to performing techniques automatically, so he could devote more time to thinking. Song Ming wondered if he was a larva, what would he like to become in the future? He walked slowly on the ground, not seeing anything in front of him. His feet grew out of his worn-out shoes, making holes in them. The guy asked himself if he wanted to become a cicada. Having climbed to the surface, the larva first sings and then becomes an adult. The frame shows the silhouette of an insect sitting on a tree. Song Ming remembers gritting his teeth in stubborn rage. In a world plunged into darkness, he again asks himself what he wants to become. He wonders why he returned. Summer has passed. Song-Ming spent it in a world devoid of light. His clothes were worn out. He began to feel that he was getting colder. Be that as it may, his routine remained the same. With a hand in a torn glove, he is simply practicing with a spear. Season after season passes, and he gets used to a world full of darkness. The situation changes. The main character again finds himself in the abode of the goddess Mersha. He calls out to her. He confidently states that he wants to complete the tests. Song-Ming's hair had grown a lot, his clothes were completely worn out, and his body had become stronger and more muscular. With a slight purple glow, all seals disappear from the main character's body. He exhales in relief and looks down at his palm. Mershi asks him how to feel again after such a long ordeal. Song-Ming looks around himself. He replies that he is pleased to be freed from the burden. He studies his hand as if he is seeing it for the first time. With a relaxed look, he notices that his eyes can see again. There is no longer a stench in his nose, and there is no deafening noise in his ears. The guy adds that his body became light as feathers, and the endless frost on his skin disappeared. He says that this is real freedom. Mershi stands behind him and hums thoughtfully. She rubs her temple, closing one eye. Song-Min turns around to ask her what happened. She opens her eye and replies that she is thinking about a reward for the guy. The goddess studies him with her gaze. Song-Min has a slightly tired but confident expression on her face. Mershi says that he spent 3 long years on her mountain and withstood difficult trials. She says that she saw students who took on an overwhelming number of prohibitions and ended up either leaving or dying. The shot shows a metaphorical man who said goodbye to life because of a cobblestone crushing him. Mershi laughs fervently, squinting. She says that she would like to see more students like Song-Min. She adds that she sincerely wants to reward him for his efforts. The guy stands a little further away and listens to her words. Mershi asks him what he wants. Song-Min raises an eyebrow in surprise, not expecting such a proposal. He immediately enthusiastically asks her if she can give him martial arts ability. Mershi grins, placing his hand on his side, and replies that he cannot do it. The main character thoughtfully puts his hand to his chin. He says that he has a goal, to achieve which he cannot waste his time on trifles. Sung-Min is referring to wanting to prevent Baek Sogo's death at the hands of Ho Young. He adds that he doesn't have much time. He clenches his fist, looking stubborn. The guy says that he wants to become much stronger, but does not know how to achieve this. He looks up to look at the goddess. Sun-Min asks her if she can give him what he needs. Mershi hums thoughtfully. She tilts her head slightly to the side and grins fangly. She replies that she can guess what the main character needs. She says he needs time. The goddess says that she can give him time. Song-Ming immediately widens his eyes in surprise. He asks if Mershi can really do this. She waves her hand and places a seal right in the center of the main character's chest. The goddess tells him to go to Drimmer and show Denir this seal. Sun-Min asks who Denir is. Mershi replies that it is the god of time who will give Song-Ming a test. The frame shows a golden hourglass-like sign. The goddess then chuckles that after the time god's trials, Song-Ming will think that everything was very easy on Mount Mershi. The guy squints with suspicion, sensing something is wrong. The goddess then adds that the difficulties must only attract more to Song-Ming. Mershi says that in the Denir monastery, rewards are given in proportion to the difficulty of the tests passed. She waves her index finger in the air. The goddess adds that dangers and difficulties lie ahead for Song-Min. The main character grins rather grinning, giving his face a frighteningly determined expression. Mershi says it was a reward for defeating Flam. She raises 3 fingers into the air, which glow golden. The goddess says that Song-Ming's next reward will be for the 3-year trial. The main character notices that Mershi is generous. She replies that the gods are not petty. She tilts her head to the side and presents the second award. With a snap of her fingers, the goddess summons a man in a white suit with red hair out of nowhere. He emerges from Mershi's shadow and immediately bends his back and bow. Mershi says that with the help of her patronage, Song-Min will be able to enter the ranks of Erebris. Song-Ming jumps in surprise. The summoned man has a yellow monocle on his right eye. Under his left eye there is a red spot that looks like scales. He looks up at Song-Min, still bowing. He asks permission to introduce himself. The man straightens up, leaving one hand behind his back and politely holding the other in front. He says his name is Neville, and is called the representative of the Erebris Guild. He politely addresses Mershi, asking if she really wants to recommend the main character to them. The goddess immediately confirms this. Neville chuckles tactfully and adds that Song-Ming is not up to the level of his guild. The guy frowns in confusion, clearly upset by such words. Mershi asks in bewilderment if Neville is sure of this and asks him to take a closer look. After a moment, the man opens his eyes in surprise, noticing something he had not seen before. He immediately bows his head and apologizes. Neville adds that upon closer inspection, he realized that Song Ming fits the guild's requirements. The man apologizes for the misunderstanding and explains that he first made the conclusion based on Song Ming's low level of martial arts proficiency. The main character grins irritably, trying to hide his indignation. He says that he has achieved a fairly high level of martial arts for his age. He adds that usually a person of this level is respected in society. Song Ming looks at Neville from under his brows. He asks if his level is still considered low for the Regressed guild. The guy raises his hand indignantly. He asks what kind of guild this is. Neville patiently suggests the correct name. He explains that their guild supplies elite clients with the rarest and most exquisite goods, and also does much more. The frame shows the symbol of the Regressed guild, which is a red dragon. Neville adds that they take orders for goods, conduct auctions for rare artifacts, obtain information, and generally provide anything a customer might want. Song Ming looks up thoughtfully. He asks if this means that the Regressed guild sells elixirs and martial arts books. Neville confidently snaps his white-gloved fingers to confirm this. A purple magic tablet appears in the air. Song Ming studies the tablet. He exclaims in amazement, noticing there the great Shaolin elixir of restoration, which cannot be bought anywhere for money. This elixir is considered the best murum in the world, produced in the Shaolin temple. When absorbed, it heals all wounds and restores the equivalent of 60 years of Kai energy. It looks like a red ball and is worth 200 million in local currency. The sign also shows the 1,000-year-old Japanese knotweed, which is a root vegetable. During the period of growth, he absorbs the spiritual power of Wudin Mountain in Hubei province. When absorbed, knotweed provides the equivalent of 30 to 60 years of Kai energy. Song Ming also notices a technique from the Hua Mountain sect in the goods, called the Plum Blossom Sword. He also finds the Wudin Mountain technique, which is called the Taiji Sword. Neville bows calmly, closing his eyes. He replies that this is their job. He adds that the range of rarities and curiosities of the Regressed guild will satisfy anyone. He also notes that Song Ming is quite knowledgeable. The main character turns to Mercy and asks her if she is a member of the Regressed guild. She replies that yes, because their services are useful to her. Song Min purses his lips tensely and thoughtfully. He reflects on the fact that this guild has a goddess as a client. The guy wonders who these people are. Neville straightens up and looks down at Song Ming, extending his right hand forward in an inviting gesture. He asks if Song Ming agrees to become a client of the Regressed guild. The main character thinks gloomily that he has nothing to lose. He nods and agrees to the offer. Neville gives the guy a magical piece of paper and asks him to sign it. It indicates where you need to put your fingerprint. Song Ming signs with concentration. In the background, Mercy dozed off. After some time spent filling out the paperwork, Neville congratulates Song Ming on becoming a client of the Regressed guild. With a businesslike gesture, he puts the papers away in the inner pocket of his white jacket. The man adds that he is looking forward to their collaboration. He then snaps his white-gloved fingers. He says that he is giving a special prize on his own behalf. The protagonist's worn and torn clothes are immediately replaced with new ones. His regrown hair returns to its former neat state. Neville says it's better this way. Song Ming feels his hair in surprise and looks at his new clothes. He is wearing a dark turtleneck, light pants, and new boots. Mercy praises Neville and adds that she didn't like the fact that Song Min grew hair that rivaled hers in length. Neville bends his back again. He says he has to go. The man adds that if you need him, you can call him at any time. He disappears in quick wisps of black energy. The main character throws confused agreement after Neville. Mercy approaches Song Min and asks if he liked her reward. The guy sincerely answers that yes, and thanks the goddess. She chuckles at the fact that he continues to familiarly address her as you. She says that becoming an honorary buyer in the Regressed guild is a great honor that should be treasured. Mercy winks at Song Min and nods. She then asks where he is going to go now. The main character replies that he is going to get to Behenger first. The goddess hums thoughtfully, retreating some distance. She says everything will be as he wishes. The frame shows the guy's concentrated but calm face. Mercy supplements her speech with a request not to forget about her monologue. Song Ming remembers the moment when the goddess delivered a monologue with her back to him. There is a change of scenery. The main character has left Mercy's abode and confidently walks forward along the forest path. He remembers her words spoken during the monologue. She said there was a reason for his return. She also added that in the world of Iria nothing happens without a reason. Song Min wonders what the words the goddess said meant. He slows his pace slightly. From the bushes, two predatory faces of monsters are looking at the guy, saliva dripping from each mouth. The main character does not notice them, continuing to think. He remembers that he is very lucky in his new life. Three monsters that look like anthropomorphic hyenas come out to meet him. They are armed with swords and wear breastplates. Song Ming stops in front of them. His mind is still far away, thinking about meeting Ho Young and helping Beak So go. He wonders if this could have happened by accident. The monster strangles noisily, its predatory yellow eyes widening. At the same moment, the monster is hit in the neck by Song Ming, who neutralizes it. The main character asks himself who arranged his meetings with the people who helped him. With quick swings of his spear he deals with a crowd of anthropomorphic hyenas, killing them without hesitation. Song Ming decides that he doesn't care who is behind his luck. He doesn't want any unnecessary headaches. 3 years of training in the mountains turned him into a supreme martial artist. The bloody spear blade stops glowing with purple energy. Song Ming stands among the bodies of the killed monsters. He grabs the spear more comfortably. The main character remembers that his body is already 18 years old, and he is already a supreme master. The thought occurs to him that others will consider him a natural genius. He wipes the blood from his lips with a quick movement of his fist. Song Ming thinks that his skill was achieved through sweat and blood, as well as luck in the form of fateful meetings. He says out loud that he has a long way to go. The main character takes a confident step forward. He thinks that many unpredictable meetings also await him ahead. He is sure that all this will make him stronger. Song Ming continues on his way along the forest path. He decides to go to Behenger, but first become a mercenary. He smiles confidently, anticipating further challenges. The main character is determined that his adventure is about to begin. Devnark is a magical armor. It is made of gray metal with a bright red stone in the center of the chest. He was found in the dungeon of a black magician in the vicinity of the city of Behenger. A bald man with a thin mustache found Devnark and put it on. He proudly put his fist to his chest. He was a C-rank mercenary and was lucky enough to find the armor. The properties of Devnark are truly incredible. Despite the severity of the battle, the mercenary confidently held the sword and filled the weapon with white Kai energy. With this armor, even a C-rank mercenary would gain an amazing level of martial arts proficiency and become a supreme master. Song Ming sits in the forest, immersed in the darkness of the night. The orange glow of the fire plays on his serious face. He muses that if a supreme martial artist obtains Devnark, it will increase his level to a master of martial arts. The main character thinks that he could continue the tests on Mount Mercy, but he is too eager to take advantage of the opportunity to find magical armor. He sits on the ground in front of a large fire and takes a bite of the roasted meat of a wild animal. Song Ming remembers that in 6 months, if his knowledge from his past life is correct, the Black Magician's dungeon will be ruined. Therefore, his immediate goal is to become the best mercenary in the city of Behenger. He takes a mouthful of meat and chews it slowly, looking forward purposefully. He wants to become the best mercenary so he can take part in a raid on the Black Magician's dungeon. Some time passes and the situation changes dramatically. The 2-story building in European medieval style is illuminated by the rays of the setting sun. The action moves to the mercenary guild in the city of Behenger. Someone asks in surprise if Song Ming really wants to become a mercenary. A man with a thin mustache in a green vest stands behind the bar with a bottle of alcohol in his hands. He perplexedly answers the main character that there is no need to inform him of his intention to become a mercenary, because he is a simple innkeeper. The man turns around and gloomily tells Song Min to go up to the 2nd floor and ask the guild clerk about everything. He adds that he is busy now. In the foreground, a blond man begins to laugh loudly. His face is smeared with crumbs from his dinner, which he eats with a fork. He mockingly asks if Song Ming is going to become a mercenary. He adds that this is of no use to an alien from another world and advises him to get a job washing dishes in the kitchen. An elusive silhouette of a hand appears out of nowhere. A man sitting at a table covered with food in a tavern only has time to open his eyes in surprise when the fork disappears right from his hand. He asks in amazement where she went. Song Ming, who managed to quickly steal the fork right from under the man's nose, holds it in his hand with a calm expression. The innkeeper looks at the fork in amazement, near which bright purple energy begins to accumulate. He closes his eyes and exhales, noticing the use of the weapon's Kai. In the background, a blond man crawls on the floor looking for a fork. The innkeeper notes that this was not a bad move, and Song Ming must be a supreme martial artist. The main character looks back at the man with an impassive expression. The innkeeper apologizes for his tone and invites Song Min to sit down. The shot shows a large wooden candle chandelier hanging from the ceiling of the inn. Those present turn to look at the main character. Astonished whispers pass through the room. The bald man points out that Song Ming is a supreme martial artist. Standing a little further away, a man with long blonde hair is surprised that the main character used weapon Kai. The innkeeper and Song Ming sit opposite each other at the table. They have serious facial expressions, carefully studying the main character with a stern gaze of yellow eyes. The innkeeper introduces himself. His name is Baron. He is a magician and leader of the mercenary guild in Behenger. He adds that being an innkeeper is simply his favorite job. Song Ming also looks at the other person carefully without answering. He thinks that he knew about everything in advance and therefore spoke to Baron. A beer barrel can be seen in the background. The main character remembers that in a past life he got a job as a mercenary in this particular guild in Behenger. He notices many familiar faces among the people. They all whisper to each other in surprise as they sit at the large wooden tables in the inn. Baron explains that usually in his guild, the highest martial arts masters immediately receive S rank. He takes out some yellow papers with a red stamp on them and glances through them. The guild leader then raises his hand high and points his index finger towards Song Ming. Baron says that they need to make sure that the main character is not just an inexperienced youth who did nothing but train in the mountains. He adds that the guild needs warriors. He hopes that Song Ming has already guessed that the test will be in the form of a fight. Throwing a calm and restrained glance to the side, the guy only agrees. Baron rests his cheek on his palm and looks down at the yellow papers he holds with his other hand. He looks at them thoughtfully. The guild leader says that he will find a suitable order for Song Min. He adds that Song Min will be partnered with another S-rank mercenary in the test battle, so there is nothing to worry about. He says that if the guy succeeds, he will be approved as an S-rank mercenary. The main character briefly nods his head, looking at the man, and agrees. After some time, the next day comes. Events are transferred to a forest area. The blue sky is filled with white clouds. Someone asks Song Min if he is always silent like a fish. The main character tilts his head slightly to the side, answering that this is probably true. He thinks that the years of loneliness on Mount Mercy still left their mark and made him silent. In the foreground, a white-haired man laughs cheerfully and calls Song Min boring. He turns to the main character, showing a wide scar running across the jaw and down along the neck. He notes with a slightly mocking smile that he had a better opinion of Song Min after witnessing a clever prank with a fork on a man in an inn. He asks how Song Min is going to seduce girls with such a stone face. The main character is calmly silent in response, sparkling with handsome features. The man sadly turns away and lowers his gaze, realizing that with such an appearance, Song Min will not have any problems with girls. In the background, the main character continues to stand silently as if nothing had happened. He remembers that this man's name is Lud, and he is an S-rank mercenary from the Behenger City Guild. Lud wears heavy armor and his hair is cut short and shaved at the sides of his temples. Song Min notes that in his past life he knew Lud only by name and never communicated with him. Lud will now be Sun Min's partner on this mission. They slowly move along the forest path. The man turns to the guy and points to himself, offering to ask questions if there are any. The main character replies that he has nothing to ask. Lud is here to closely monitor how Song Min is coping. The man hums thoughtfully. There is a curious look on his face as he asks if Song Min has ever fought an ogres. The main character momentarily tenses up at this thought and breaks out in a light sweat. He replies that he has not had to fight ogres. Ogres are some of the most powerful monsters in the world of Iria. They look like huge, strong creatures with green skin and giant limbs. They have a wide mouth with a row of long, sharp fangs. They have moderate resistance to magic and their skin is as hard as steel. The task that Sun Min and Lud have to cope with is killing an ogre. This order came from villagers, one of whom saw an ogre in the forest. The man immediately ran away in fear as soon as he saw a giant black silhouette in the forest and a red eye flashing among the treetops. Lud goes a little ahead, confidently walking along the forest path. He tells Song Ming that 2 S-rank mercenaries can handle the monster, so there is nothing to worry about. The main character slowly follows the man a little further away. Then Lud looks around thoughtfully, noticing low green trees. He says that everything is somehow strange, because such a forest is too small for an ogre. His face becomes more serious and gloomy as he looks at the trees around him. Sun Min casts a wary glance at his partner's back. He tilts his head slightly to the side and asks what that means. Lud spreads his arms to the sides and raises an eyebrow, turning to the guy. He tells him that ogres are large monsters from 3 to 5 meters tall. This means that such huge creatures need a lot of food. Lud adds that in a small forest like this, the ogre's food would quickly run out. Song Ming nods curtly. He turns around, paying attention to what lies near the dark tree. Suddenly his face darkens and he sweats intensely because of what he noticed near the tree. He calls out to the man. He turns around, paying attention to Song Min's discovery. Lud immediately widens his eyes. A nervous shiver runs through him. They stand in front of the mutilated and gutted body of an animal with a pool of blood underneath it. Lud squats down to examine the carcass more closely. He asks hesitantly if it's even a deer. Songming replies that the carcass looks like a deer. The man looks gloomily at everything that remains of the animal. He notes that only ogres are capable of tearing parts of living creatures. The main character stands a little further away, also looking at the bloody bones of a deer on the ground. He realizes what else Lud was going to say and continues his thought. Bowing his head with a frown on his face, he says there is no sign of killing for meat. Lud agrees and says it's weird. Still squatting, he lifts his head to lock eyes with Songming. The man also notes that they haven't seen any droppings either. Suddenly they are shocked by a deafeningly loud sound. They immediately tense up, eyes widening in shock. Even the earth shakes from the sound. With a loud roar, something grabs the tree trunk and rips it out of the ground, causing everything to shake mercilessly. Lud pulls his sword out of its sheath, turning in the direction where the loud sound came from. Songming also turned around. He pulls his spear from the oversized pouch he wears on his belt. The main character and his partner exchange quick, confident nods and glances. Songming rushes forward with his spear pointed forward. Lud follows, clutching his sword in one hand. They rush forward towards the monster. Songming's foot quickly pushes off the ground. In the distance, the silhouette of a huge creature appears, which with one hand breaks a tree trunk in half. His yellow eye sparkles dangerously in the dark light. The creature rises above the treetops. Songmin and Lud freeze in place, dumbfounded, their mouths parted in surprise. Their blood runs cold from what they see. The man begins to sweat in horror and shouts that they did not expect this at all. He tells Songmin to run away because they can't handle such a creature. Songming tenses, bowing his head slightly and pursing his lips. The creature has a huge, ugly, swamp green hand with long fingers and claws. Part of his body is different in color, with huge red spikes sticking out of it. Near the monster's mouth, flaps of different colors of skin are visible. The lips were tightly sewn to each other with thick threads. The creature loomed over the mercenaries at full height and swung its huge hand wide. One of them guessed that this ogre was a chimera. His broad face was half green with a red eye, and the other half had red skin with a large yellow eye. Lud fearfully remembers everything he knows about chimeras. He imagines a pink doll, to which they sewed a yellow eye, a horn, purple tentacles instead of the right hand, someone else's green hand instead of the left, and someone else's black leg. A chimera is a magical creature made from parts of various monsters. Its creators pursue the goal of creating the most perfect monster. Each type has disadvantages, and they can be leveled out by sewing a part of the body of another creature onto the monster. It represents a person who has someone else's, stronger hand sewn on. Even a rank F goblin can be turned into a chimera that will pose a threat comparable to a rank B monster, because such a chimera is much less predictable than a simple goblin. Lud imagines a goblin with a tongue hanging out and a predatory expression on his face, who has huge spider legs instead of legs. But a chimera made from an ogre poses a huge threat. He remembers an ordinary ogre, which in itself is very dangerous. Lud understands that even S-rank mercenaries cannot cope with such a monster as the chimera ogre. He clenches his teeth in horror and anger, looking with wide eyes at the murderous creature in front of him. Songming also tensely clenches his teeth and frowns, realizing the danger. The chimera ogre stands right in front of the mercenaries and swings at them with a huge tree that was torn right out by the roots. The main character stands motionless, watching this, while Lud runs screaming for cover. The monster looks at Songmin with slanted, different eyes. Large chips from a tree trunk are flying around. The main character tightly grips the spear with his hands and watches the movements of the chimera ogre in bewilderment. The creature sharply raises its fist and bends down, preparing to strike the guy. The fist rushes towards Songming with deafening speed. Time seems to freeze when the main character looks in surprise at the approaching hand of the chimera ogre and takes a stance. Lud runs away screaming and looks back to see what's going on at Songming's place. The guy looks with wide eyes at the approaching knuckle of the creature's finger, which is about to come into contact with his own nose. At this moment, his eyes open even more, and they are enveloped in lilac energy. Songmin lifts his leg and takes a step to the side. He uses a technique called soul flight without shadow, movement first, running without a trace. The chimera ogre's fist passes through the air right over the place where Songming was a second ago. At this moment, the guy with a surprised and tense expression on his face is already a meter away from his previous place, dodging the blow. Lud, who was hiding behind a nearby tree, peeks out from his hiding place and opens his mouth in shock. Songming himself is surprised by what happened. He moves to the side, noticing that he has become fast and wondering when exactly this happened. He understands that this is not Mount Mercy. A memory of the purple seal of prohibition flashes into his mind. Song-Ming notes that the ban on lightness has not pressured him for a long time. He takes a decisive stance in front of the giant chimera, tightly gripping his spear. The creature half turns and swings its dark green hand with long claws. The main character uses the technique of flight of the soul without a shadow, movement 2, shadow dance. He jumps onto the chimera ogre's arm and runs determinedly up to the shoulder, his body lighting up due to the purple energy. Song-Ming then abruptly pushes away from the monster's body and jumps up in front of the huge, surprised face. He then reaches back, pressing his palm against the end of the spear's handle, which is surrounded by purple energy. He uses the improved Ninth Heaven Spear technique, Move 1, Heartbreaking Killing Blow. He slams the blade of the weapon right into the center of the monster's chest, causing a large shock wave to form. The chimera ogre staggers back due to the force of the attack. Song-Ming tenses and jumps back, moving his spear slightly to the side. He notes that the monster's skin is as thick as stone. He looks at the chimera ogre, who has no wounds from the spear blade. There is only a small abrasion at the site of the impact, and steam is emanating from there. Hiding behind a thick tree trunk, Lud watches in shock as Song-Ming bounces away from the monster in the air, not even piercing the green skin with a spear charged with Kai energy and leaving not a scratch. The man grins with rage, gloomily realizing that they will be given a reward just like for an ordinary ogre, which means what is happening is not worth it at all. He decides it's too late to run and lifts his booted foot to take a step forward. He doesn't know if they can succeed, but he feels obligated to help. Suddenly, Song-Ming's voice sounds in his head, causing him to freeze in place in surprise. The main character says that Lud is not obliged to help him. The man raises his head in amazement, realizing that it was telepathy. At this time, Song-Ming stands with a spear opposite a monster that is almost 3 times larger and wider than him. Lud telepathically asks if the guy has really gone crazy and decided to fight the ogre chimera alone. Song-Ming calmly and confidently replies that he knows it is a dangerous creature. Lud screams in frenzy and fear that the guy cannot know anything, because the main character has never fought even with an ordinary ogre. He adds that the spear does not penetrate the thick skin of the monster, which means he is even stronger than the two-headed ogre. Song-Ming crouches slightly, taking the weapon more comfortably in his hands. He mentally agrees with Lud's words and wonders why this monster is so strong. He mentally asks himself why he has a strong feeling that he is able to defeat this creature. The chimera ogre stands in front of a huge, dangerous, and seemingly invincible rock. Song-Ming uses another improved technique called Ninth Heaven Spear, Move 2, Lightning Split Strike. It fires a series of fast, targeted attacks, illuminated by bright purple energy, at the chimera ogre's torso. The monster leans back due to the speed and pressure of the blow. It breaks on the ground with long, powerful claws, leaving deep holes in it. The creature manages to stay on its feet with its arms spread wide to its sides. No blow left any wounds on it. Only faint steam emanates from the points of contact with the blade. Song-Ming jumps back to land. Lud, in shock and sweating, shouts that the chimera ogre was again unharmed and that he is impenetrable. The man clenches his teeth in horror and anger. He is overcome by the gloomy thought that he would not have been able to help Song-Ming even if he joined the battle. The main character calmly lands on his feet and grabs the weapon more comfortably with both hands, waving the red ribbon tied to the shaft of the spear. The chimera ogre moves its multicolored eyes, instinctively paying attention to the red ribbon. He is distracted by the tip of the tape, which flutters in the air. At this moment, Song-Ming suddenly flies into the air, leaving the monster bewildered. Flying in the air towards the monster, with a confident grin, the main character asks himself whether this creature's eyes are so hard. There is a sharp, painful blow, blood splashes, and a loud sound is heard. Song-Ming threw the spear directly at the chimera ogre's yellow eye, piercing it with the sharp blade. With a painful groan, the creature throws back its head and wraps its arms around it. It reaches for the spear in its eye. Lud is still watching from the sidelines, in shock. He realizes that the chimera ogre was distracted by the red ribbon on the spear, which Song-Ming took advantage of and struck directly at the monster's eye. The man understands that the main character, despite his small age, masterfully wields a spear. After the jump, Song-Ming lands on his feet on the ground and at the same time takes out a new spear from the dimensionless bag. He lifts his head, pulling out a new weapon by the shaft. The monster, looking dissatisfied, pulled the weapon out of his eye and broke it in half. Song-Ming throws the new spear over his shoulder with a grin. He is pleased to think that he has hit the eye and will achieve his goal. Suddenly he sees something that makes him tense up and open his eyes wide in surprise. The hole from the spear blade in the yellow eye of the chimera ogre gurgled and slowly grew back, as if nothing had happened. Sun Min realizes in shock, looking at the monster's stupid smile, that he managed to heal himself. Lud screams in horror that this chimera is an ogre crossed with a troll, so she has the ability to regenerate. The main character looks at a huge creature with the body of an ogre, a dark green clawed hand sewn to it, and legs covered with brown fur. Song Ming understands that he will not be able to defeat this creature through physical force. The guy smiles nervously, frantically wondering what he should do now. At this moment, the creature moves and extends a huge hand forward to grab the main character. Lud screams loudly, mouth wide open, leaning forward and trying to warn the guy about this. Song Ming furrows his thin eyebrows as his eyes take on a confident look. Silhouettes of Beak Sogo and Ho Young appear in his head with their backs turned to him. He remembers that he has plans for his life. The chimera ogre moves forward with its palm wide open, preparing to grab the main character. Song Ming stands motionless. He then decides that he shouldn't risk his life in vain since he has plans for her. He gets into a fighting pose and lets out a war cry, charging his weapon with purple Kai energy. He decides that he will not die here. Sun Min recalls the advice of Ho Young, who at that moment was holding his spear in her hands like a staff with a grin. She told him to repeat the 3 basic spear techniques every day until they were perfect. A small white glint flashes in Song Ming's eyes as he confidently looks forward, shrouded in lilac light. The monster's huge palm moves closer and closer, and the monster practically touches the main character's head with its thick fingers. The guy mentally turns to Ho Young and tells her that he trained the techniques endlessly, just as she said. He swings his spear so that the blade describes a small semicircle in the air, and the very tip touches the creature's yellow nail. Song Min decides that it is time to take stock of his training. He begins to quickly spin his spear, forming a kind of shield of purple energy, and with this pushes the huge green hand of the chimera ogre to the side. The guy again remembers Ho Young's face when she looked at him and handed him the spear. She said that parrying reflects an opponent's attack with an outward movement. Song Ming abruptly pushes the surprised creature's hand away, creating a strong shockwave right in the air. From the force of the blow, the monster's hand is wound back by inertia, rising high into the sky. The guy wastes no time and delivers several more quick blows, one after another, to different places on the torso of the huge chimera ogre. During this time, the creature uses its other arm, which is distinguished from the rest of its body by its dark color and long claws. He brings it back, swinging. With a wide and fast swing, he brings his hand forward towards Song Min, and the claws almost touch the protagonist with the very tips. The guy again remembers Ho Young's words, which explain that a block is the result of a downward rotational movement that blocks the opponent's weapon. Song Ming, with a concentrated expression on his face, concentrates his strength and attention, filling the spear with Kai energy. One single tip of the monster's claw barely touches the sharp edge of the spear blade. At this moment, Song Ming makes a quick circle in the air with his weapon, turning the monster's hand palm up and throwing him into confusion. Lud, standing at a distance, opens his mouth wide in amazement at the sight of such a technique. The monster freezes in an awkward pose, with one arm raised high in the air, and the other arm twisted close to the ground. At this moment, Song Ming jumps high. He remembers Ho Young's words again and realizes that now is the time to strike. He grabs the edge of the weapon's shaft more tightly. The guy chooses a target, which becomes the monster's knee, covered with brown fur. With all his strength, he hits the chosen place with the sharp blade of the spear, and leans on top with the entire weight of his body, attacking the enemy. Song Ming adds force to the blow with extra force in his own weight, piercing the monster's skin and blood spraying from the wound. The chimera ogre lets out a painful groan from under his tightly sewn lips, his whole body twitching violently due to the pain. The guy yanks the blade back out of the monster's body. Song Ming points out that this was quite effective because the creature's joints are vulnerable. The monster staggers and falls heavily to one knee due to a huge bleeding wound in his leg. He is clearly in great pain and, covered in sweat, looks at the main character in fear and anger. The creature quickly slams its hand on the ground, but Sun Ming manages to jump out of the way in time, and the fist lands on an empty space. The guy wonders how long it will take the ogre chimera to restore his wounded joint. A piece of solid earth that flies into the air passes just above Song Ming's temple, leaving a deep abrasion there, but the guy ignores it. He decides not to think about the chimera ogre's regeneration rate. With a quick and swift movement, the main character pierces the monster's second knee with a spear. He then sharply kicks the shaft and breaks it in half, leaving half of the weapon inside the monster's body. The broken end of the weapon falls to the ground with a thud, and Song Ming quickly jumps back and pulls out a new spear from the dimensionless bag. He decides that the monster's death will occur before the end of regeneration. The main character understands that with the spear inside the creature will not be able to recover. The Chimera Ogre looks down at his mangled leg and touches the wound with a trembling hand. Meanwhile, Song Ming finds himself behind the monster with a spear in his hands and looks up at the target to attack again. He sharply pierces the thick shoulder of the Chimera Ogre right through the armpit, causing the tip of the blade to show outside. The monster screams painfully. Its blood splashes in all directions in bright red spots. Song Ming takes out a new spear from the dimensionless pouch on his belt right in the air. He notices that now the creature has both legs and right arm immobilized. The monster sits on his knees, pressing his only good hand to his wounded shoulder, from which a spear sticks out, and looks at Song Ming in fear. The main character wastes no time and rushes into the attack again, clutching a weapon engulfed in purple energy. He decides to strike again as he rushes forward. He uses the improved Ninth Heaven Spear technique, Move 2, Lightning Splitting Strike. Several targeted quick blows fall on the monster simultaneously, hitting it all over its body at once. The Chimera Ogre's bulky body staggers back due to Song Ming's onslaught, so the monster is forced to take a step back. The main character continues to hit the creature with a spear. Blood sprays into the air. After some time, all the wounds begin to heal back, emitting yellow steam, and the monster again swings at Song Ming with its only healthy hand with claws. He quickly brings his hand down, sharp claws cutting through the air. Towards the huge approaching palm of the monster, Song Ming puts out a blade charged with purple Kai energy. He deftly dodges the creature's next blow, ducking as he runs, and notices that the Chimera Ogre is slow. The main character wonders if maybe it's just that he has become faster. He brakes with his foot, resting it on the hard, dry ground. He realizes that he no longer feels heavy. A large insect with thin yellow wings, a cicada, sits on a tree trunk. Song Ming realizes that he hears the chirping of cicadas. He swings his spear behind his back, swinging and aiming for another blow. He then runs very quickly up the Chimera Ogre's body as it falls heavily on its back to the ground. The guy realizes that the chirping of the cicadas is the same noise that he heard on Mount Mercy. He realizes that he doesn't want to be a cicada. Song Ming finds himself right in front of the monster's frightened, ugly face. Behind you can see pale yellow steam emanating from the Chimera Ogre's wounds. The main character swings his spear with a confident look. He agrees that he was a larva on the mountain. He adds that at that point it had not yet pupated to become a cicada or anything else. It represents a small, pale larva curled up in a ball underground. The guy wonders what he wants to become in this case. With a frenzied expression full of cold purpose and a purple glint in his eyes, Song Ming quickly slashes his spear at the monster twice. He realizes that he doesn't know what he's going to become. He adds that he definitely won't become a cicada. The main character, holding a bloody spear in his hands, looks down at the splashes of blood from the pierced eyes of the Chimera Ogre. Song Ming decides that he doesn't want to have any regrets. He raises his spear high into the air and swings it. He remembers that something like this already happened in his first life. He understands that he does not know how his current path will end. Song Ming decides that he is only evolving and preparing for what is to come until he reaches the end. Lud froze in shock, mouth wide and eyes wide as he watched what had just happened. Song Ming lowers his head and breathes heavily, covered in sweat and the blood of the monster, leaning with both hands on the bloody spear. He stands on the head of the slain creature and slowly removes the spear from its forehead. The ogre chimera lies lifeless on the ground. Lud mutters in amazement, asking who Sun Ming even is. The main character slowly raises his head, his face smeared with blood and sweat as he looks down at Lud. He then looks up at the blue sky, dotted with white clouds, and wonders who he is. Song Ming looks down at his left hand, covered up and down with scars from healed abrasions and old calluses. He answers his own question, realizing that he doesn't know. He looks at his hand, which has small drops of blood on it. His gaze darkens slightly, and he laughs tiredly. Song Ming then clenches his hand into a tight fist. He realizes that he is sure of one thing. Looking at the spear in his grip, he decisively, out loud, says that he is not a larva. Lud came closer and is now looking at the guy with a blank expression of surprise. He is silent for a while, looking absurdly at Song Ming with his mouth slightly open and bewilderment in his eyes. Then Lud's face brightens, his gaze clears, his lips distort into a hesitant but relieved smile. He asks what kind of nonsense Song Ming is talking about, but adds that he is an interesting guy. Near a fallen tree, on dry and hard ground, surrounded by debris and leaves, a dead cicada lies belly up. Noticing this, the main character relaxes and smiles, despite the blood from the abrasion on his forehead, which flows down to his eye. He realizes that the cicadas no longer chirp. There is a change of scenery, and the action moves to the tavern. Baron, with amazement and bewilderment, raising one eyebrow and parting his mouth, silently looks at what is in front of him. Standing there are Song Min and Lud, who is enthusiastically waving both arms and pointing back, displaying the huge carcass of a slain chimera ogre. Baron looks at the brought prey in bewilderment, not knowing how to react. He thinks that killing a chimera ogre is an achievement definitely equal to SS rank. The innkeeper frowns at the main character, a drop of sweat rolls down his forehead. He notes that there has never been a case where someone received an SS rank from the very beginning. Song Ming calmly shakes his head with an unreadable expression. He replies that S rank will be enough. He decides that this doesn't change much anyway, because he's happy with the current state of affairs. As a reward for killing such a dangerous monster, Song Min receives 27 million eras, including a 10% commission and a shiny, golden plaque of an extra S rank mercenary. The corpse of the Chimera Ogre was transferred to the Mercenary Guild for further study, and the main character received more than 20 million for it. Lud was delighted and honestly offered his share to Song Min because the main character had done all the work himself. The guy nodded in response and thanked him. As a result, he received 47 million eras. The surroundings change. Song Min walks along a cobbled city street past a stall selling various products. He thoughtfully examines a gold coin of local currency glistening in the sun. The guy thinks that 47 million eras seems to him an incredible number. He recalls that in a previous life he risked his life fulfilling orders and received, at best, 1,000,000 eras. A moment flashes back in his memory when he, with a hastily bandaged wound on his head and a mission leaflet, came to collect the reward and received only 120,000 eras. Song Ming puts the gold coin into his oversized pouch while wondering what he should do with this money. Then an interesting idea pops into his head. He takes his spear out of the oversized bag and examines it with curiosity, noticing chips on the blade. He hums thoughtfully. The narrative again moves to the guild building of the city of Behanger, to a dark small basement. Baron looks at Lud seriously, crossing his arms over his chest, and asks how Song Ming is in battle. Another man stands with his hands on his hips and replies that the main character was pretty good. He then points a finger at his head, inviting Baron to see for herself. The innkeeper replies that everything is clear to him. He takes out a large wooden staff with a semicircular end and touches it to the top of Lud's head, causing a shower of small magical blue sparks to fly through the air. Baron stands with his eyes closed while Lud's memories of the details of Song Min's battle with the Chimera Ogre are transmitted to him. Then the innkeeper opens his yellow eyes and hums thoughtfully, his gaze serious. He notes that Song Ming is clearly superior to S rank. Lud replies with careless innocence that Baron can simply assign the main character an SS rank. At this time, the magic staff slightly moves away from his head, still faintly sparkling blue. Baron rests the lower edge of the staff on the floor, puts his hand on his belt and looks away to the side. He replies that he will think about it, but he cannot decide this alone. After a while, he thoughtfully adds, Song Ming, who is classless and has become a supreme martial artist in just 4 years, would be liked by a certain Xion. The scenery changes again, showing Song Ming standing in a dark, narrow alley looking at his own shadow. He calls out to Neville, and from his shadow, little tendrils of black magic appear and begin to move. From there, Neville immediately materializes, immediately bowing in front of the imperturbable protagonist. The man straightens up as the remnants of black energy slowly dissipate in the air near him. He says that he is glad to meet Song Min and asks how he can help. The main character recalls how he was surprised to notice chips on the blade of his spear while walking along food counters. He realizes that all this time he had little interest in weapons. He thinks about his old and faithful spear, which he has used all this time. Song Ming recalls that previously his only criterion was the ability to swing and stab weapons. He notices that during the battle with the giant chimera he felt something. The main character remembers how he was unable to pierce the thick skin on the monster's chest for the first time. He wonders if it was possible to pierce the Chimera Ogre's thick skin with some other weapon. The guy imagines a situation with a difficult battle against a dangerous, powerful opponent with a heavy saber that could break the blade of a spear into pitiful pieces. Song Ming decides that he doesn't want the spear to suddenly become a burden in an emergency, so now he's going to buy something better. He smiles and confidently tells Neville that he needs a new weapon. The man hums knowingly and opens the purple system window. He asks if Song Min wants to buy something from the range or create a new weapon. He also clarifies the guy's budget. The main character looks at Neville pointing his finger somewhere in the system window. Song Ming thinks that even if it takes longer to create than to buy, he will still prefer it. He replies that he has 47 million eras and that he wants to obtain a new weapon created. Neville hums thoughtfully again and notes that this is not too much money. Songming raises an eyebrow in bewilderment and asks, dumbfounded, if 47 million eras is really a small amount. Neville calmly replies that the Regressed Guild only works with first-class blacksmiths, and therefore the price of their services is appropriate. The main character imagines the blacksmith in the form of a gnome, who holds in his hands a created sword with a golden hilt. Neville adjusts his monocle and, as if nothing had happened, suggests that Songmin leave her soul as collateral or take out a loan for a large amount at a low interest rate. The main character nervously refuses. He is intensely trying to find out if there are any other ways to create weapons in 47 million eras. Neville freezes at his question, his finger pressed to the panel of the system window. He points out that if this is a condition of the deal, then he has the opportunity to introduce Songmin to someone. He asks if the main character has a desire to meet this person right now. The guy replies that would be great. Neville agrees and raises his index finger in the air, his hand covered in a white glove. He sweeps his finger sharply from top to bottom in the air right in front of Songming's astonished face, forming a thin black line of magic that makes everything around her go dark. Suddenly this line quickly diverges to the sides, forming a purple portal reminiscent of a huge crack right in the air. Songming steps back in surprise. Then Neville begins to disappear into the shadow of the main character again, finally explaining that the guy can contact the creator of the weapon using this purple portal. Songming agrees, confused, and Neville finally leaves. The main character warily and hesitantly extends his right hand towards the portal and wonders what it is. It seems to him that there is a gap in space. He asks himself what the Regressed Guild is if a simple intermediary has such abilities. A voice is heard from the portal, which frightens the already dumbfounded protagonist and asks if the guy is really just a child. A tear in space reveals a muscular woman with dark skin, long elfin ears, and blonde hair pulled back into a high ponytail. She looks back at Songming while holding a huge hammer over her right shoulder. She says her name is Selger. The girl adds that she doesn't know how many times she will meet the main character, but invites him to exchange names first. Selger raises his eyebrows phlegmatically, lowering his hammer and turning to get a better look at Songmin with his bright golden eyes. She asks why he stands like a pillar and does not come to her through the portal. The guy stares at her in bewilderment, while in his head the image of a bearded, malicious gnome blacksmith is shattered by the appearance of a pretty girl, who is not even a gnome, but a dark elf. Confused, he agrees to enter the portal. Songming passes through a rift in space, ending up in a stone forge, and calls his name. He tells the girl that he would like to order a spear. Selger glances at him half-heartedly, holding a hammer in his right hand. The elf asks what form of spear the main character prefers. He pulls his spear from the oversized pouch on his belt and replies that he wants the weapon to look something like this. The girl bends down to take a closer look at the shaft, bandaged with white cloth for convenience. She notices that it is the shape of a spear of the Central Plains. She raises her head slightly, looks to the side, and asks Songming to show him his spear style. He becomes wary and asks again. The main character raises an eyebrow, cautiously wondering why the elf should see him, since showing her fighting style is taboo for a martial artist. Selger looks at him impassively, straightening up, her face showing no emotion. She replies that she needs it to make a spear that will be compatible with Songming's technique. She adds that the details vary greatly from person to person, so it's important to consider every little detail. The main character hesitates in place, looking anxiously at the elf, and is silent. He then asks if she is going to create a spear to suit his martial arts style. Selger sighs irritably, lowering her head, as if she was already starting to tire of this conversation. She then belligerently punches herself in the chest with her left fist in a show of persistence. She exclaims that she is already 400 years old, and that she loves being a blacksmith and has been doing it for 350 years. She adds that she does this despite the difference in starting conditions, especially compared to dwarves, who are naturally talented at blacksmithing. Songming raises his eyebrows in surprise, recognizing his own features in her speech. The elf furrows her brows and adds with steel in her voice that she has spent 350 years making real efforts to become a master blacksmith, and therefore her abilities are in no way inferior to those of the dwarves. The guy freezes in confusion and is struck by a cold realization. He remembers how, as a boy, he stood in front of Ho Young and shouted to her that they initially had different starting conditions. He grins at the memory and looks at Selger, realizing that he and she are similar in this way. After a moment of silence, the elf sighs, looks away and mutters that she has no need to tell such details to a child she is seeing for the first time. She turns away and puts her hand on her head, a hurt and upset look on her face and her long elf ears drooping. She adds that if Song-min doesn't like something, then he can go to the dwarves. But the main character interrupts her with a light-hearted statement that he is ready to show her his fighting style. Selja turns around in amazement, lowering her hand, as if she doesn't believe what she just heard. The guy calmly repeats that he will show her his martial arts. She looks at him with her golden eyes in confusion. The elf says that it is surprisingly easy to persuade him, because usually martial artists, after such a request, begin to suspect her of something and leave. Song-min tilts his head slightly to the side. He smiles welcomingly and replies that Selja herself told him that for 350 years she really tried, developing in blacksmithing. The elf is silent for some time, standing opposite the main character and looking up at him as if she doesn't quite believe his words. Then she turns away, blushing, and chuckles, and her ears rise again and turn pink with contentment and embarrassment. She raises her index finger, stating that Song-min really seems to be too trusting. The guy with a slight smile replies that, on the contrary, everyone usually tells him that he is too suspicious of everyone around him. Selja looks down with an embarrassed and flattered smile, tucking his hands into the pocket of his beige blacksmith apron. Then, still not turning, she rests her left hand on her hip, raises her right hand into the air, and points her finger at Song-min standing behind her. She says the guy clearly knows how to choose the right words. An involuntary smile appears on her lips at the realization that her efforts are finally being recognized. Then she deliberately lowers the corners of her lips with her fingers in order to look more serious and not show her joy at the words of the main character. She turns to Song-min, who is standing motionless in the same place, and addresses him. Selja then slings her hammer over her left shoulder and deadpans that she likes Song-min. She says that she is calculating, but because of her sympathy for the main character, she will make for him a more expensive and high-quality weapon than he is willing to pay. The elf smiles good-naturedly, and her long ears turn slightly red. She adds that Song-min will make a great regular customer. Some time passes. The main character remembers the face of Selja, who told him that making a new spear for him would take several months, so he should relax and just wait. He sits on a thin mattress in a dark room, in a meditative position, and his body is engulfed in violet energy, which forms a kind of flame. He remembers the fight with the huge ogre chimera, which was the first real battle after Song-min became a top-level martial artist. He sits with his eyes closed, engulfed in the violet light of his own energy. The main character understands that he has learned a lot, and that the acquired knowledge must be mastered completely. He remembers Ho Young, who cheerfully patted him on the shoulder after a training battle, and said that Sun Min understands the situation well, which is also a kind of talent. The main character reflects on this and remembers that understanding the situation, which Ho Young called a talent, grew into a real skill during training on Mount Mercy. The Lilac system notification reveals that Song-min has a skill called Sixth Sense, which allows him to sense things beyond the five senses. The main character first felt that he had this skill just during the battle against the Chimera Ogre. He felt that his body was moving on its own even before he clearly realized the need for it. He remembers how his body quickly and subtly evaded the huge fist of a terrible monster. Sung-min suggests that this is what people call a sixth sense. The main character sits on a gray mattress, continuing to meditate with purple energy around his body. He believes that this is a powerful force, but should not rely solely on it, despite the fact that training on Mount Mercy has sharpened his sense of touch and sixth sense. However, he notices that the rest of the feelings were not affected and an imbalance arose that something needs to be done about. Now his sense of touch and sixth sense are strong. His vision, smell, and hearing are at an average level, and his taste is practically not improved. Song-min opens his eyes and tenses, frowning at the thought that if he doesn't address the imbalance now, it will be even more difficult for him to change it in the future. Some time passes and the scene changes to a mercenary guild in Behenger, where Song-min has come. He is greeted by Baron, who is standing behind the bar and holding a green bottle and a large wooden mug. He asks what the protagonist's plans are and if he plans to request the next task. Song-min replies that he did not come for a task. He places his right hand on his hip and holds his left hand at chest level in a thoughtful gesture. The guy asks what turned that creature from the forest into a chimera ogre. The innkeeper pours an amber drink into a mug. There is a plate of orange soup on the bar counter. There is cutlery, and the main character stands opposite. The man asks if Song-min really cares so much about the origin of the monster. He adds that a chimera always has a creator. He also says that it would be difficult to investigate this case alone, so he is collaborating with the Mages Guild. Song-min raises his head in interest and pays attention to this phrase. He remembers that he never met a chimera ogre in his previous life. He suggests that no one completed this task, or the creature simply dealt with the mercenaries. The guy imagines how a huge monster calmly and easily cuts two unfortunate warriors in half. He recalls that in his past life, 6 months later, it was discovered that the creator of the chimera was the owner of the dungeon. But this does not mean at all that this time the author of the creature was the same person. Song-Ming imagines a mysterious man in black clothes with a brightly glowing red eye peeking out from under his hood. The main character understands that since he killed the chimera ogre, the future has already changed. With a confident and calm look, he boldly and decisively declares that he would like to see the body. Some time passes, the situation changes, because the guy went to the Guild of Magicians in the city of Behenger. The huge head of a chimera ogre with empty eye sockets and a wide open fanged mouth hangs in the air thanks to dark purple magic. The stranger says that he is glad to meet Song-Min. Opposite the severed head of the monster stands a long-haired guy in a white robe and waves his hand in the air, turning his head from side to side. Not far from him, also with the help of magic, a yellow eye taken from the creature's skull levitates. The main character experiences an unpleasant shiver because of the view that opens up to him. The long-haired guy turns around, still holding the monster's body parts in the air with magic, and says with a small smile that his name is Kim Jong-hyun. He is a black magician. He asks if Sun-Min is surprised by what he saw, and explains that he is in the process of researching a chimera ogre. He uses magic to send the monster's yellow eye to the side, and the main character frowns with hostility as he follows him with his gaze. Song-Ming turns to face the magician and says his name, also clarifying that he was the one who killed this chimera ogre. Standing half-turned to the main character and holding his right hand in the air, Jong-hyun asks if the other guy is Korean. He turns around, pointing his finger at the main character with a slightly tired, but friendly look. The magician reveals that he is also from Korea, but also clarifies that it is unlikely that they are from the same dimension. He suddenly asks if there was some kind of gate crisis in Song-Ming's world. The main character stares at his interlocutor in bewilderment, not understanding what he means. He asks again what a gate crisis is. Jong-hyun replies that it was when monsters started coming from the gate connected to another dimension. Then he interrupts himself and adds that it's not too important. The magician happily jumps up to the confused protagonist and with two pale hands grabs his palm, shaking it enthusiastically. Jong-hyun says that he is glad to meet you, even though they are from different dimensions. He adds that he is very happy to meet a Korean after so many years. Then the magician slyly narrows his black, empty eyes, slowly releasing Song-Min's hand from his grip. He adds that the main character does not have to be happy about such a meeting. The spearman suspects something is wrong and frowns with suspicion, looking at Jong-hyun and feeling a strange, alarming aura from him. He asks what the magician means. He spreads his hands carefreely, smiles broadly and harmlessly, and replies that he didn't mean anything by it. The magician asks why Song-Ming came here. The main character, still wary of such suspicious behavior of his interlocutor, gloomily replies that he was going to look at the body of the chimera ogre. He recalls a change in the flow of the future, due to which he needs as much information as possible in order to quickly obtain the Devnark armor. It represents a kind of branching of paths where it is unknown what will happen, given that the chimera ogre was killed. Jong-hyun tilts his head down slightly, covering his eyes with black bangs with white streaks. He chuckles and says that he will now tell you everything he knows. The magician raises his head and points his finger upward at the head of the killed monster, still levitating with the help of purple magic. He says that he can't know some things for sure because the creature is dead, but it is clear to him that the chimera ogre has many high-level spells. Jong-hyun says that the black magician who created this creature is likely among the ranks of great magicians. Song-Min visibly tenses up, becoming more serious at the news. The magician continues, and notes that the monster's mouth was sewn up because in order to test the chimera, it was necessary to drive it to the point of ferocity due to hunger. Now the creature's mouth is wide open again, and the end of the thread remains sticking out of the two outer holes. Song-Ming recalls finding a deer carcass in the forest, which was torn into pieces but not eaten. He realizes that the sewn-up mouth was the reason why the chimera ogre was unable to eat the animal. Jong-hyun chuckles and spreads his arms in different directions, shrugging his shoulders carefree. He says that this is the end of the story. He adds that he could continue talking about artificial monsters, but he understands that Song-Min is not interested in this topic. The main character looks at the black magician with silent dissatisfaction. He then replies that talking about artificial monsters doesn't excite him. He asks what Jong-hyun was going to say before, mentioning that Sung-Min doesn't have to be happy about meeting another Korean. The black magician shakes his head vaguely, again hiding his eyes behind his bangs. He replies that he didn't want to say anything special. Jong Hyun suddenly adds that Sun Min is confused about the cause and effect relationship. The main character shudders in shock, instantly covering himself with perspiration, while an image of tangled light lines pops up in his head. He asks how Jong Hyun knew about this. The interlocutor is only sluggishly surprised at the protagonist's awareness, slightly raising his eyebrows. He replies that black magicians are able to read human souls. He also adds that Song Min is an unusual person since he already guessed everything. Jong Hyun takes a slow step towards the other guy, his feet wearing regular black and white sandals. With a creepy expression, a crooked and frightening smile, and wide dark brown eyes, the black magician looms over Song Ming's face. He ominously says that if he were the main character, he would have long ago fallen into despair and gone crazy. The black magician squints his tired dark brown eyes, under which there are dark circles. He asks Song Min in a quiet voice if he even understands what this is all about. The main character immediately recoils back, away from the black magician. He replies that he knows about the eternal torment after death that awaits him. Jong Hyun calmly says that it will happen. With a sugary, sycophantic smile, he leans slightly forward towards his interlocutor. He asks if that's why Song Min has such a complicated cause and effect relationship. The spearman frowns with disgust and points his finger with suspicion at the untrustworthy magician. Sung Min asks why on earth he should answer Jong Hyun and if he can trust him. The other guy promises that he will tell the main character everything he doesn't know about. He then adds that he will also give Song Min a mana oath, which he will definitely die because of if he suddenly breaks it. Jong Hyun leans forward with an enthusiastic expression on his face, placing his right hand on his chest as a vortex of bright blue energy envelops him and a blue sparkle appears in his eyes. He swears that he will never talk about what he hears. Sung Min did not expect this at all. He watches in surprise as bright blue magical energy swirls around Jong Hyun. The main character thinks that he does not understand what is happening at all, but decides that since the interlocutor gave him a mana oath, he should take advantage of the opportunity. Song Ming directly states that he is a regressor, which stuns the black magician. Jong Hyun asks if the guy really returned to the past after death. He then nods his head, looking at the still slightly tense and wary protagonist. Jong Hyun mutters that this was indeed the reason for the confused cause and effect. He mentions life and death, and that Song Ming has violated so many fundamental rules of the world order that he will definitely be met with commensurate karma. Jong Hyun bends his back slightly, looking up at the main character with an almost sly and interested expression on his face. He says that since Song Ming knows the reason why the cause and effect relationship is so confused, then the magician can tell something more. He tilts his head ominously to the side, his face turns black due to the shadow falling on him, and his smile looks more like a mask. A frightening dark purple energy begins to emanate from Jong Hyun, which makes Sung Min wary. The voice of a black magician pronounces a phrase that tells the main character that he is special. It's as if Song Min feels with his back someone's chilling presence, which appears phantom-like in the form of blue-green energy very nearby. Jong Hyun, looking tired due to dark circles under his eyes with a blank look but with a constant smile, adds that it's not just about Sung Min's twisted cause and effect relationship. He begins to explain further, sounding scary again. His unfinished sentence echoes alarmingly off the walls of the dark room in which they stand many times. Song Ming immediately bends over and grabs his head with his hand from the unexpected and sharp pain that struck him, caused by an unclear reason. Jong Hyun, whose face is not visible due to the shadow formed by his hair, suddenly says that he cannot say. Song Ming rubs his head, which just suffered from a strange sharp pain, and makes a puzzled sound. Jong Hyun repeats that he cannot tell the main character what he intended to. The spearman continues to hold his head with his left hand, breathing heavily, and looks up at his interlocutor. He asks what this all means. What he sees shocks him and makes him widen his eyes in confusion. Jong Hyun says that if he tells Sun Min everything, he will die. He looks at his trembling left hand with empty eyes, from which scarlet blood flows down his pale cheeks, just as it flows from his nose and mouth. The main character looks excitedly at his interlocutor, surprised by the sight of unexpected blood. Jong Hyun continues to examine his shaking palm with a sad half-smile. He adds that it looks like Song Min's life is no longer his. The situation changes, and the main character, with a face full of bewilderment, finds himself outside Jong Hyun's office, and behind him a large wooden door slams shut with a loud knock. He remembers how the black magician, holding a towel in his hands and wiping the blood from his face with it, stepped aside and smiled as if nothing had happened. He apologized for not being able to tell us anything and asked to come back next time when he was more focused and able to collect his thoughts. Sung-min was left standing in a daze near the door to Jeong Hyun's office, looking confusedly into the space in front of him. He wonders what the hell just happened. He then remembers that he once saw something similar. A memory comes to his mind of what happened in Mersha's abode, when cracks began to appear everywhere and did not disappear until the goddess forced them to retreat. Song-min shrugs his shoulder in confusion, puts his hand on his hip and turns to leave. Suddenly, someone with scarlet hair and red clothes calls out to him. The guy turns around when he hears a voice. A girl with long scarlet hair and red eyes waves her hand at him welcomingly. She asks if he really is the boy from Mount Mercy. She notes that Song-min has grown a lot over such a long period of time. The main character stares at the girl in bewilderment because he doesn't recognize her. He asks who she is. The girl immediately frowns irritably and points a finger at herself. She asks if Song-min doesn't remember her, Scarlet Lessier, who taught him magic. The guy, confused, remembers Scarlet, whom he saw on Mount Mercy when she was dirty and exuded an unpleasant stench, and compares that image with the girl he sees in front of him. He is silent for a while. Then he, standing awkwardly opposite Scarlet, asks her not to lie. The next second, the evil girl with a flourish, putting all her strength into the blow, punches Song-min hard right in the face. After some time, Song-min still realizes that this is actually the Scarlet he met on Mount Mercy. There was a strong mark on his face from the girl's fist. He says they haven't seen each other for a long time. Scarlet calls him a fool and agrees. She looks up at him with her hand on her hip. She notes that she is still glad to meet. Then she asks the main character what brought him to the Mages Guild and does he really want to join it. Song-min answers vaguely, without details, that he had some business here. Scarlet asks what kind of business he had here. She looks behind Sun-min and sees that Jeong Hyun's office is there. She immediately guesses that the guy came here because of Jeong Hyun, whom he calls a crazy idiot. The main character turns to the door to the Black Magician's office. He asks if Scarlet really knows him. The girl loudly replies that of course she is familiar. She adds that all black magicians are not very nice people by nature, but Jeong Hyun seems especially creepy to her, although he is quite capable. The shot shows a black magician standing in front of a cabinet with various glass containers, holding 2 human skulls in his hands. Scarlet adds that if Sung-min isn't completely crazy yet, then he shouldn't get involved with someone like Jeong Hyun. The sorceress comes closer to the main character and pokes her pale index finger into his chin, forcing him to raise his head. She says that even though the guy can take care of himself, he should still be careful. Song-min replies that he understands and thanks her. Scarlet looks up at the guy, and a shadow of a satisfied smile appears on her phlegmatic face. He says it's nice for her to see a familiar face after all these years. She gives him a quick flick on the chin and takes a step away, giving him one last good-natured wink. She tells Sun-min, who is surprised by such a gesture, that she is busy today, so she leaves first, but invites him to stop by if he suddenly gets bored. She adds that her laboratory is on the 3rd floor, and that if the guy comes, she will at least treat him to tea. Walking towards the stairs, Scarlet waves both arms broadly and energetically goodbye. She also shouts to the main character that if someone offends him, he can turn to her. Song-min gives her a low-key farewell wave in response. As the girl leaves, a strange, suspicious feeling comes over him, and he slowly lowers his hand. The guy remembers the monologue of the goddess Mersha, pronounced in his presence in her monastery, and her tense, weak smile. He also remembers the blood flowing from Jeong Hyun's eyes, nose and mouth, and the sentence that the black magician did not finish. Sung-min remembers Scarlet's friendly, good-natured behavior towards him and the way she waved goodbye. He experiences an elusive feeling that people have become more favorable to him, which seems very strange. The main character stands motionless in the same place and looks down and looks at the gray stone floor of the room. He thinks that something is clearly happening, and he is sure of it, but he does not know what it is. He silently looks up and looks at the metal candle chandelier hanging under the vaulted ceiling. He thinks that he doesn't know what exactly is happening. After thinking about it, Song-min decided that such things were too complicated, and he was unnecessarily distracted by them. He picked up his old spear with the shaft wrapped in light cloth and decided to focus his attention on what was happening directly around him. He received the task of killing 2 two-headed trolls. These were dark green creatures with long sharp claws and 2 heads with ferocious grins. The difficulty was S, and the reward was promised to be 60 million eras. In the tavern where the mercenaries of the guild of the city of Behenger gathered, Song-min met Lud. The man approached his table, smiled welcomingly and said hello, waving his hand. Together they decided to hunt trolls. Lud, with a cheerful and confident expression on his face, turned to the main character and boldly declared that this time he would show him what he was capable of. Song-Ming nodded his head, smiling slightly at this phrase. He replied that he was looking forward to it. The guy realizes that he is beginning to acquire new connections. In addition, only in his second life did he fully understand the meaning of the phrase, which insisted that every person needs a person. The main character recalls a fight against two two-headed trolls, during which both he and Lud each took on one opponent, covering each other's backs. Lud attacked his opponent with wide swings of his sword, charged with yellow Kai energy. Sudming fought against the second monster with a fast spear glowing with purple Kai energy. The main character stopped pushing people away. He realized that Lud was actually a good friend. He remembers how they returned from a mission satisfied, and the man threw his arm over Song-Min's shoulder in a familiar way and laughed about something while the guy listened to his words with a smile. The main character understands that over the years of practice his senses have dulled a little, but he felt comfort from being next to Lud. They have been traveling together for 3 months now. There is a change of scenery, and the narrative moves to a tavern in Behenger. The owner places a bag of coins on the bar counter next to a wooden mug full of beer. The man says that the mercenaries coped with this task brilliantly, and 50 million eras deservedly go to Song-Ming. The main character with calm joy thanks for the money, while in the background with frenzied enthusiasm Lud checks the authenticity of the coins. He turns to his partner and, blissful from the reward he has received, offers him a drink. Standing next to him, Benir ignores the man's behavior and remembers something. He says that someone wanted to meet Song-Min. The guy takes the bag with the reward and raises his eyebrow in confusion. He asks who wants to see him. Benir replies that this was reported by the captain of a mercenary unit called the Torch, whose name is Xion. The shot shows a large man with broad shoulders, a muscular back and short red hair. Song-Ming immediately opens his eyes in surprise and jumps in place. Even Lud is distracted by the joy of receiving the award and frowns in amazement. Baron asks if the main character knows who Xion is. With a slightly tense smile, Song-Min replies that he knows. He mentally adds that it is impossible not to know about this. The huge torch detachment consists of more than 100 mercenaries. Song-Ming remembers their emblem, which looks like a yellow roulette engulfed in bright orange flames. Xion, the commander of this unit, is one of the 3 SS-Ranked mercenaries in Behenger City. He is a master of the highest level of martial arts, having passed the 100 levels of Shaolin. Song-Ming admired this man in his previous life. He imagines himself standing far behind Xion, looking at him from behind, and watching as the commander raises a tightly clenched fist high into the air. The protagonist remembers his scarred face full of excitement from watching Xion. Song-Ming thinks that among the many heroes he chose this person because Xion was also classless. The situation changes dramatically as time passes. A red-haired man holding a thick cigar in his mouth sits on a sofa with his legs and arms spread wide as smoke fills the room. He says that he is glad to meet Song-Min and says his name. The man is Xion, the captain of a mercenary squad called the Torch. Xion's face is half hidden by the thick cloud of smoke coming from his cigar, but the man can be seen grinning widely. He points out that Song-Min is also classless, which means he had a hard time. The main character sits opposite the man in a chair, leaning his elbows on his knees, and grins weakly. He mentally notes that now, as a top-level master, he perfectly understands how strong Xion is. The man changes his position and also leans forward, resting his elbow on his knees, and then with his thumb he puts out the cigar, which makes a faint hiss. Xion gives off a palpable red-yellow energy, and up close you can see that he has gray streaks. Song-Ming remembers that this man will soon become the supreme martial artist. Xion continues to smile welcomingly and turns his gaze to Song-Ming. He asks if the main character is 18 years old. He then adds that the world is cruel to those out of class, and he has experienced it all himself. Xion says that the fact that Song-Ming has reached the highest level of martial arts at such a young age is amazing. The main character smiles contentedly and only chuckles modestly in response. Xion then suggests stopping the pointless chatter and getting down to business. He looks confidently and firmly at the guy sitting in front of him and invites him to join the Torch squad. Song-Ming flinches in amazement, shocked by such an unexpected invitation. Xion continues his speech, not taking his eyes off the main character for a second. He says that Song-Min defeated the Chimera Ogre, which means he will soon reach SS rank. He guarantees him the position of deputy captain of the squad if the guy agrees to work for Xion. Noticing Sun-Min's surprise and bewilderment, the man adds that he understands the guy's confusion over such an unexpected proposal, but promises to help him decide on the answer. He extends his left hand forward and places a small wooden box on a low brown table directly in front of the main character. Xian asks Songming to respond to the proposal once he looks at the contents of this small box. The guy clenches his hands folded on his knees into fists in confusion. When the box opens, the main character's eyes widen in amazement, beginning to shine from just one glance at the object lying inside. Xian sits with his right hand on his knee, and with his other hand he holds the box open. Inside, a small red ball with a light pattern on it lies neatly on a white cloth. Xian explains that it is a weak energy pill, an elixir from the Shaolin Temple. Whoever swallows it will receive a large amount of internal energy. The man asks if Songmin has ever heard of this thing. With a wide grin and a firm gaze of green eyes, he looks at the main character sitting opposite. Xian says that the guy will receive the elixir by accepting one simple condition. Songming, confused, asks what condition he should accept. Xian hands him the paper and places it next to the box containing the red elixir. He tells the main character to sign this contract. Songming takes the document in his hands and reads the details, holding the paper at eye level. He reads the condition, which states that the guy must obey the orders given by Xian. The man replies that this is clearly a simple condition. He adds that this is not a magical contract, but if Songmin breaks it, he will be held accountable. Xian gestures with his left hand as he explains the details, a smirk plastered on his face. He clarifies that these conditions are simply needed to restrain the guy. The man also says that if Songmin talks about his martial arts, he will receive an even stronger energy pill. The main character frowns with displeasure and remains silent in response, annoyed by the terms of the contract and such an offer. He moves his hand with the paper to the side, looking at the large figure of the squad captain in front of him. Songmin asks if anyone would actually agree to such a condition. Xian replies that of course there are such people. Then he leans forward and very ominously, almost threateningly, bares his teeth, looking at the main character from under his brows. The man adds that those people who want to become mercenaries in the city of Behenger agree. Some time passes, the situation changes, and the story returns to the tavern. Lud listens animatedly to Songming's retelling of the story while drinking from his beer mug. He screams in shock, jumping up in his seat, and asks what the guy answered to Xian's proposal. Songming calmly says that he refused. He sits with his forearms resting on the bar counter, looking ahead thoughtfully while an empty wooden mug and bottle sit next to his elbow. He adds that he will not sign a slave contract. Lud looks at him, holding his mug in his hands. He agrees that it was the right thing to do. However, he then sullenly tilts his head forward and scratches the top of his head, frowning. Lud says that after what happened, Songmin should leave Behenger City. The main character looks back at the mercenary and raises his eyebrow warily. He asks if it's really that bad. Lud explains that Songmin now appears to be in mortal danger. He adds that Xian was seen in many suspicious activities, because otherwise he, as a non-class person, would have had a pretty hard time. The man also mentions that all the mercenaries in the city with rank and above are in his squad under his control. Songming imagines Xian sitting in a commanding pose with a cheeky grin astride 3 rank mercenaries. Lud adds that Xian can cause problems if he is opposed and calls him a scoundrel. Songming only remains silent in response, his face becoming irritated and gloomy. The man remembers that in the past, when Xian had an S rank and Lud had an A rank, he too rejected his proposal, and then the flow of work stopped because everything in the city is under the control of the Torch Squad. The shot shows Lud crying on his knees in the rubble under a sign that says he is a mercenary open for orders. The man grabs his wooden mug and frantically pours beer into himself, quickly swallowing it. He loudly resents the fact that he received an S rank in another city, and when he returned, Xian had already become an SS-class mercenary. Songmin sits quietly at this time, with his hands folded on the bar counter, and looks ahead in front of him with a sad and thoughtful expression on his face. While in the background Lud continues to pour mug after mug of alcohol into himself, the main character leans forward and rests his chin on his hand, reflecting on everything that has happened. He winces slightly at the thought of everything. He understands that Xian had no idea about such matters. Songming wonders how he should feel now that he has seen the ugly side of his idol. At this time, Lud does not notice the guy's thoughtful and gloomy state at all and energetically jumps up to him. He asks if Songmin wants to go to Mictor with him. He doesn't have time to finish because someone present in the tavern loudly asks if the others have heard the news. A bald mercenary sitting in the center of the inn talks to his comrades sitting next to him. He says that a black magician's dungeon has been found. His words reach across the hall to the bar where Lud and Songming are sitting. The main character turns around warily upon hearing these words and listens to the continuation of the conversation. Lud also turns around. The bald mercenary continues talking and reveals that this black magician may have been the one who created the Chimera Ogre. He adds that people are going to assemble a cleanup team led by Torch Squad. Songming winces at the mere mention of this name and frowns with hostility. Some time passes, a change of scenery occurs, and the main character stands in the Selger Forge. The elf says that creating the weapon took longer than planned. Songming replies that there is nothing to worry about because he did not urgently need the weapon. Selger bends down to take out a new spear ready. She says that because the main character kept giving her money while working, it took her longer. She then takes the spear by the handle and hands it to the guy. Songming takes the weapon in his hands and looks at it curiously. It is made of black metal, there is a scarlet pattern on the blade, and a red ribbon is tied near the junction of the handle and the blade. Selger explains that the base was mithril, and the coating was made of black iron. She says that these materials are good conductors of mana and Kai energy, so it will be easier to use them. She asks if the guy likes the result. Songming examines the new spear in quiet delight, his eyes widening. He thinks that this is the best weapon. After some time, the environment changes. Neville appears next to Songmin. A man with a relaxed expression notices that Selger liked the main character. Songming emerges from the portal, frozen in the air, with a spear in his hands. He asks what Neville means. The man replies that the new weapon is made of very expensive materials. He adds that Songming gave money during the work to somehow improve the spear, but most of it was spent on materials, and in the end Selger worked for practically nothing. The footage shows how Songming broke into the elf's forge, distracting her from her work, with a bag of money. Neville shakes his head with his eyes closed. He says that he does not understand her action. Songmin raises an eyebrow in confusion. Neville, looking at the main character, reports that he has a strange charm that makes people want to help. The guy immediately becomes gloomy and tenses up sharply, covered in sweat due to an unpleasant feeling. Neville adds that he didn't mean anything bad. Then he notices that he's been talking too much and it's time for him to go. The man bows and again finds himself surrounded by small whirlwinds of black energy. In parting, he says that Songmin can contact him at any time convenient. For some time the main character stands in the dark alone and is silent. He looks down, confused, almost scared, at the ground in front of him. He understands that he is surprised not by Neville's strange words, but by the fact that they confirm the guy's guesses. Songming recalls that he sensed something was wrong on Mount Mercy, but chalked it up to luck and continued on his way as if nothing had happened. He moves from his place and takes a step deeper into the dark forest. He wonders what if there is something inside him that attracts people. He remembers the crowd of smiling people he met along the way, including Scarlet, Diokbi, Lula, Ho Young, Beak Sogo, Hans, and Jack. A sharp realization hits the main character like a cold sensation that comes out of nowhere. A picture of benevolent people shatters into pieces as Songming stands in the dark, surrounded by broken pieces. He wonders whether, in this case, all this can be considered something real. After some time, the main character meets Lud. The man happily greets the guy and asks where he has been. Songming looks at the mercenary gloomily, with wide eyes, as if seeing him for the first time. Lud examines the protagonist's face in bewilderment. The guy thinks that if his suspicions turn out to be true, then even his friendship with Lud will be a lie. The man tries to cheer up Songmin and throws his arm over his shoulder, smiling widely. He asks if the guy's mood has turned dark because he's worried about the dungeon raid. He adds that there is nothing to worry about because Lud will be going with Songmin. The main character stares blankly into space in front of him. He remembers the raid in the dungeon. He understands that due to changes in the future, his worries have only been confirmed. Because he killed the Chimera Ogre, the guild began searching for the Black Mage, and the dungeon was discovered 3 months early. The shot shows a man pointing to a cave from which ominous dark energy is emanating. Songming remembers that something else has also changed. A man approaches them from behind and asks if the main character is still here. It's Xian, and he leans closer to the wary Songming with a cheeky grin. He notes that since a recently risen star joined the raid, it will definitely be successful. The man narrows his green eyes slightly, baring his teeth. Songming realizes that the next change is that Torch Squad is participating in the battle. The main character remembers that in a previous life they were unable to join because of another task, but this time the raid happened earlier. The shot shows Xian standing at the head of a huge squad and flexing his shoulders while other mercenaries stand behind him with serious faces. The captain of the detachment draws attention to Lud standing at a distance, who has become very gloomy and frowning. He greets him and asks how he is doing. The mercenary replies that a lot of time has passed. Xian ruffles the man's hair in his own way and tells them to be careful. He adds with an ominous grin that the dungeon is a very dangerous place, and you cannot immediately predict your place and time of death. Song Ming frowns and looks at the squad captain from under his brows. Torch Squad walks ahead wearing their signature insignia cloaks, leaving Song Ming and Lud behind. The mercenary turns to the main character and points his finger after the departing Xian. He asks irritably if the squad captain just threatened to kill them amid the chaos of the expedition. Song Ming remembers that he spent a long time deciding whether to join, but his useless abilities decided for him. A system table appears with his skills. He returned from Mount Mercy 3 months ago, and there has been no progress since then. To improve himself, he needs the magical Devnarch armor, which transforms a third-rate warrior into a supreme martial artist. Lud turns to Sun Min with a displeased expression on his face. He says that Xian will not act rashly in front of others, so there is no need to worry about it. He grumpily adds that idiot Xian left the Shaolin Temple. Song Ming remembers that there are only 27 people in the raid. Torch Squad includes 1 SS rank fighter, 4 S rank warriors, and 12 A rank mercenaries. The rest are not included in the detachment. The main character notes that even the head of the guild has joined. He looks back to where Baron is sitting with a magic staff in his hands, and mentally hopes that the man will not make a scene. Meanwhile, Lud strikes a warrior pose, holding his sword and emitting black energy. He tells Song Ming not to worry and promises to cut off the head of anyone who tries to pull something off with his phantom sword technique. The main character laughs at the eccentricities of the mercenary, who stands in various stupid warlike poses. The guy notes that Lud had no reason to participate in the raid, and he signed up because he was worried about Song Min. The main character smiles softly, looking at the man. He feels grateful for this, because Lud's relationship with Xian will deteriorate after this. The guy's smile becomes empty and tense when the thought of the mysterious reason for the kindness of others creeps into his head again. He lowers his head and tells himself to stop thinking. Lud continues to stand nearby, swinging his huge sword widely. Baron steps aside with a staff in his hands. The guild leader addresses all raid participants and asks if everyone is ready. Baron opens his mouth wide and raises his staff high. He shouts that the mercenary guild of the city of Behenger is going to the dungeon of the Dark Magician. The man glances at everyone present. He says that it is unknown what awaits them inside, but they are the best in the city. Xian stands grinning with the rest of his squad. The rest of the mercenaries, including a man with dark green skin, 2 boys, 1 girl, and 1 man, stand in a separate group. Lud and Song Min stand gloomily away from everyone. Baron, with a confident look, tells everyone to be on their guard, and then they will be able to overcome everything that comes their way. He loudly proclaims that it is time to begin his work. The mercenaries are about to enter a dungeon from which a mystical scarlet glow emanates. A huge crowd of mercenaries, one after another, talking to each other or remaining silent, gradually enters the dungeon. The start was quiet. Walking ahead was an A rank mercenary, Jiang Kal, a man with strong green skin, holding a torch. Thanks to his mastery of external martial arts, his body became as strong as stone, but it was torn in half like soft tofu in one sharp, quick swipe. The upper half of his body quickly flew towards the mercenary who was walking behind. The comrades following Jiang Kal stopped. The man with the scar on his eye, who had caught the upper half of his body, looked in fear at Jiang Kal's face, frozen with an unspoken scream. It was reflected in his wide brown eyes. He looked forward and saw the mercenary's legs lying apart from his torso. The man immediately screamed in horror. Baron clenched his teeth in anger and activated a spell, which immediately illuminated the dungeon. It became clear that numerous snake-like monsters were sitting on the walls of the cave and were opening their mouths towards the crowd of mercenaries. Song Min realizes that it will be a long night.